Hey guys, hi. I'm here now. I'm in both places still. I'm still trying to bully them. They're not coming today. I think I'm not angry enough. I think that's why. You're gonna try to pretend to be trots? I hate you. I hate you guys. First time chat, hi. Welcome. One day, okay, people are coming. Okay. I think they need to see me. To know I'm here. So you guys come over. We'll do a little Q&A the first few minutes over on Twitch where you can ask things and I'll show you evidence if it helps, okay? And we'll talk about things. But yeah, okay, wait. Every time somebody says something that paints North Korea as bad, as fake, you never agree with the flaws. What flaws? You guys are making shit up. That's the thing. You want to talk about real flaws? We talk about them all the time. We talk about how they're not super progressive about gay rights. We also know the solution to that is to allow them more time to politically and economically develop stability. That's real stuff we talk about. We talk about how they did kidnap some Japanese women to try to teach them Japanese, and that was because Japan had a history of colonial imperial control over Korea, and they felt like they might need to learn Japanese in the future. That's not ideal. That's not great. We talk about that, though, right? So, we talk about that, but you guys are out here saying the most ridiculous shit I've ever heard of on the planet. You're like, why won't you address the fact that Kim Jong-un made boob jobs illegal? Why won't you address the fact that North Koreans only can have 18 haircuts? Why won't you address the fact that North Korea made hamburger illegal, but also Kim Jong-un said he invented hamburger? Like, I'm sorry, I cannot pretend like that's real. That is crazy. That is insane, and I'm not going to pretend like that's real just because you don't have media literacy skills, right? Okay, so, you guys, I'm going to jump off here. We're going to Twitch. So come join us on Twitch. It's Madeline Pendleton there as well. No underscore. It's nice. It's fun. It's pleasant. We learn. It's great. Trust me, you're going to love it. You're going to love it. Yay! Over 300 people on Twitch. Okay, we're going. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody. I think they're getting dumber. I think the TikTokers are getting dumber. Like, I think it's getting worse. Ah! Hello, first time chat. Welcome. Are you guys muted? Who's muted? Are you muted? Can you not hear me? I'm not. You hear me? Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Yay. Good. Okay. I'm like doing pantomiming. Ah! Okay, welcome everybody. So we call our Twitch stream Double Down on the News, and what we do here today, if you are new, is we take a look at the news and current events, and we find something in regular media, and we talk about it and how it is portrayed, the biases, and how it is presented to the masses, and if possible, we do a little bit of historical context to better understand these issues from a left-wing political agenda. Now, I export these videos to YouTube, and somebody did say, what do you mean from a left-wing political agenda in the comments? They were like, all news is left-wing. If you think that, we are about to blow your mind because we think that is not true. We think all news is extremely right-wing. So we're going to give you an actual political analysis over there, okay? First time here, kind of nervous? Don't be. We're totally chill. Everything's fun. It's okay. First time chat, 42 Ashtray, welcome. So today I want to do a slightly different format for irregulars just because I did find some really good supplementary material to cover Mexico, which we talked about yesterday. And I just want to make sure that our analysis is complete and correct because we were struggling kind of to understand the role of U.S. involvement in what has been going on in Mexico. And I was like, clearly they're more involved than they're saying, right? Like we're involved. But I did go after our live stream and look at Comrade Ome's analysis, who is a Mexican communist. And Ome was like, no, actually, the United States is involved in that the United States props up and supports these fucking cartels and profits off of them. But in terms of actually trying to squash cartel violence, the United States is not involved. This is part of like a political narrative the United States has going on, obviously, to demonize the people of Mexico and associate them with like violent drug addicts or something, which also helps support our anti-immigrant narrative at home where we want to keep them out. But we actually were not involved, according to Mexican authorities, in the actual operation. And they did not say this as to save face. They actually said it like, we don't know why the United States is trying to take credit for this. They don't give a fuck about the drug cartels, basically. But then we saw Donald Trump come out and use it rhetorically to try to paint this picture and be like, they need to crack down on those drug cartels more. And somebody mentioned that there was Oh my God, no. Yes, here. That there was a period where Donald Trump was actually trying to associate Claudia Sheinbaum with the drug cartels. And so I went and I did some more research, and I also realized that Claudia Sheinbaum, part of the thing she had campaigned on was not wanting to aggressively crack down on drug traffickers because she saw that as a result of poverty. So she's like, we're not going to penalize people for being poor. We are going to attempt to build up systems that make them no longer poor. So all of this, I think, plays into the rhetoric that the United States has about Mexico. And I found some good resources for us to talk about this just a little bit more before we get into the new stuff. So bear with me, please, everybody. Oh, did we get a weirdo in the chat? We got a weirdo. 3 messages. Oh, Emma Block. Wow. What kind of... Oh, they use slurs? Yeah. It's kind of boring. Here's the rule, too. If you're a troll, you have to be interesting. You can't just be like, I'm a troll. Here's a slur. Like, that's not even interesting. Like, the president uses slurs. Like, you're just boring at that point. So if you're going to troll smarter, troll more interesting, just being like, I'm a Nazi, here's a slur, blah. It's like kind of embarrassing. It's like a 12-year-old gamer troll. Be smarter. All right. So, okay, everybody. So let's do a little recap. I made some notes this morning while I was laying in bed about everything I wanted to follow up with everybody on. So there's 3 things I want to talk about. Okay? And here we go. The first thing I want to do is I actually found this article. Somebody referenced it yesterday in the chat. I can't remember who, but I appreciate you doing it. And this article is from Rolling Stone in 2024, and it's How the United States Arms the Mexican Cartels. So I wanted to read this first and foremost before we get into the other stuff. Hold on. It didn't do this morning to me. It did not do this, and I had it pulled up. And I just closed it for some reason. Wow. Let's see if archive.ph does that. I think it's going to work for us. I have faith it's going to work for us on this article. I think. Okay, here we go. Yeah. All right, we're back on. Hydrating. I got my Hydrate Ret tea. Marxist Gamer Zero, I have ADHD. Any advice on how to keep motivated and focused and work during the day? Paper calendar is the best technique I use. I have a paper calendar. I write everything I need to do on it. Anything I don't get done, I cross off and move to the next day. And it really has helped me the most. And what I do is because I have the list of everything I need to do for the day on the paper calendar and I use a month view, if I'm not feeling super motivated, I pick the easiest thing and it gets me kind of in the habit of doing it. So that's really what works for me. Thank you for the pronoun reminder, Ghost in this hat. I like it. Okay, so what are American guns doing in Mexico? Now, one of the things that we saw the Mexican authorities say is that they seized a lot of guns from this cartel in Mexico, and a lot of the guns were from the United States. So how do so many guns end up there? And we did some reading yesterday that addressed this. You know, very obviously, we know that gun sales to Mexico are a massive source of income for the United States. We also know that our banks profit a lot off of the liquidity of drug dealing cash, right? That keeps our American banks liquid. So this is going to be an expansion on this, but I just really wanted to take some time to read the story. It's not as long as it looks, and just really give us the proper context to expand on what we were talking about yesterday. So this is actually an excerpt from a book that was published in Rolling Stone. On November 20th, 2009, Mexican soldiers in Naco, Sonora stopped a 21-year-old woman driving a truck with a 50 caliber Beowulf rifle and 41 AK-47s. Kind of a vibe, unfortunately. That's a vibe, unfortunately. All right. She said she was transporting the guns to Sinaloa. A few weeks later, over 300 miles west in the border town of Mexicali, Baja California, the Army seized another arsenal of 41 AK-47s, one AR-15, and one FN 5.7. I actually am not familiar with this gun, so I'm not sure how that's actually said. I'm so sorry. And detained 12 people, all of them from Sinaloa, some of them identified as members of an organized crime group. By the end of February 2010, U.S. federal agents in Phoenix counted more than 1,000 weapons confiscated before or after they crossed the border with Mexico. Most were semi-automatic rifles, primarily AK-47s. Tracing the AK seized in Sonora and Baja California was the task of the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. We call it the ATF. The agency, better known by its acronym, the ATF, was initially part of the U.S. Department of Treasury, where its main mandate was enforcing federal alcohol and tobacco laws. In 1968, following the assassination of Martin Luther King, President Lyndon B. Johnson formed the National Commission on the Causes and Prevention of Violence, whose recommendations led to the passage of the Gun Control Act. Soon after, the ATF began overseeing violations of federal law involving firearms and explosives, including arson and bombings. However, it wasn't until the reorganization of the United States federal agencies following the 9/11 attacks in 2001, when ATF was moved to the Department of Justice, the DOJ, that illegal use and trafficking of guns became its priority. Okay, so you guys know this. After 9/11, our whole government got restructured and a whole bunch of weird shit came out of it, including ICE. Fun fact. Okay. Gun tracing is a critical part of this work, still analog in a largely digitized world. It's a time-consuming process which relies on phone calls and paper records instead of searchable databases. To trace a gun, the agent has to submit a request to the personnel at the National Tracing Center in West Virginia, providing a description of the gun and its serial number. Then, people at the tracing center begin making calls. First, they will call a manufacturer, or if the gun is foreign-made, its importer, dictate the serial number, and ask which wholesale distributor the gun went to. Next, then they call the distributor, and they ask for the name of the dealer that ordered the gun. Then they call the dealer, and they figure out who bought the gun. But the dealers don't keep electronic records, so when they get a call from the tracing center, the manager literally looks through file boxes to find the right firearm transaction record, known as ATF Form 4473, which lists the person who bought the gun from the store, their name, date, and place of birth, address, and sometimes their social security number. Fun fact, though, if you buy a used gun in some states, depending on how old it is, I don't think you have to do this. Like, in Montana, you can just, go into a pawn shop and buy a gun, and they don't do all this shit for all of them, which I think is interesting. So, I'm not really sure how that plays into it. But basically, this is a time-consuming process, is what we're learning. Yes, I can do the link with you. I have to make a tiny URL for those of you who are new. I can't copy and paste into the chat for some reason, so I'm going to make a tiny URL and just type it. 276 YWWBC. Okay. You have 9/11 autism? It's a heck of a thing. All the fallout from it, trust me. I lived through it. Okay. So this is basically this super complicated process they have to go through to track all of these guns down. And basically what we see is that there was an operation conducted under the auspices of Project Gunrunner, which was a nationwide initiative launched in Laredo, Texas in 2005, which sought to reduce the smuggling of firearms across the U.S. southern border. But while the primary tactic of Gunrunner was the interdiction of buyers and sellers who were violating laws, the agents in Phoenix had other plans. And you're going to hear people talk about Gunrunner a lot. I just want you guys to know that. When people talk about what's going on with the Mexican cartels and American guns, they're going to talk to you about Gunrunner. They're going to call it Operation Gunrunner or Project Gunrunner interchangeably, but this is what they were talking about. So this is why I really wanted to talk about this. They wanted to see where the guns went if they were allowed to cross the border, to follow the small fish until they caught bigger ones. The men buying AK-47 style rifles in bulk used an auto body shop as one of the stash houses. So agents named their operation Fast and Furious after the movie. Okay. In the movie famously, is that the one where Angelina Jolie has fake dreadlocks? Or is that Gone in 60 Seconds? I think that's Gone in 60 Seconds. Wrong racing movie, my bad. Fast and Furious is the one with the franchise, like the massive one. Okay. Do you guys all remember this? Just so you know I'm not crazy. Hold, please. ADHD diversion break. So do you guys know in Hollywood sometimes movies will come out that basically have the same plot at the same time? And the reason for this is that somebody will pitch a script and it basically a movie manufacturing house will turn it down, but they will actually secretly steal the script and make their own knockoff version of it, and then both the movies come out at the same time. So this will happen in Hollywood a lot. You'll see that. So Gone in 60 Seconds is basically the same thing as Fast and Furious, and it came out around the same time. But this is Angelina Jolie's white girl dreadlocks in this movie, which are just truly fascinating to behold. Hold on, I'll make them bigger. This is it. This is what we're working with. Look at her. She's edgy. She steals cars. That's what's happening here. Yeah, just so you guys all have this knowledge that I had, which is not related to what we're talking about at all, but felt important. You know? Okay, let's get back into it. So, In law enforcement lingo, what the agents did is called gunwalking. It's like saying that gangsters run guns, but governments walk guns. Journalist Ian Grillo said, noting the irony in his book, Blood Gun Money. Great name for a book. Blood Gun Money. If you told me this was a hardcore band from 2004, I would have listened to it. The speed of movement has nothing to do with it. The logistics are the same. The difference is in law only. Gun running is a crime, while gun walking receives the government's authorization. The tactic's formal name is controlled delivery, defined in Article 2I of the UN Organized Crime Convention as the technique of allowing illicit or suspect consignments to pass out of, through, or into a territory of one or more states with the knowledge and under the supervision of their competent authorities, with a view to the investigation of an offense and the identification of persons involved in the commission of the offense. So basically, we're just going to let a bunch of guns go into Mexico because we're going to use it for research. Okay, so that's kind of how it goes. Right. Big gun, Cage. Yeah, you really know what my interests are. Especially knowing, if you were on my TikTok live, that 3 pieces of my new wardrobe came from the same movie because I bought them at one of those vintage stores in Burbank that specializes in movie studios discarded wardrobes. Maybe I can try to find it too before we get into this since we're talking about this. And 3 out of the 4 things I bought, I looked at the tag after and they all came from the same movie, which was like a horrible action movie with Keira Knightley in it from the early 2000s that had like a 2% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I'm going to try to find this for you guys too because I think it's going to be interesting. Where is it? We can't even find it. It doesn't even exist. I swear it was Keira Knightley. Where is this? Maybe it was later than I thought. Oh my god. I can't even find it now. This is... Oh, Domino. Domino. It was called Domino. Yes. Okay. This is it. Okay, so my dress included, and 3 pieces of my new wardrobe, apparently come from the costuming for this movie, which apparently has horrible reviews, but now I need to watch it because apparently I have the same style as this character, and I just didn't realize that. This one. There we go. That's it. Why do you say we when talking about yourself? What do you mean? What are you talking about? In what context? We. What do you mean? Kinda, do I? Oh, give me like a sentence. Tell me when it happens again. I don't know. Royal we. We. Maybe because you are along the ride with me. We can't find it. Oh. Because you guys are here with me in spirit, chat. What? You're here with me too. It's us together. Do you guys think I'm doing this all on my own? Come on. What? We're in this together. It's us. When I'm doing this, it's us. You know that, right? Like, millennial heart. Like, it's us. You're with me. We are, it is pluribus. Like, we are one. You know? Come on, guys. Come on. Okay, so back on the topic at hand. Besides horrible fashion decisions of the early 2000s, which I love. Millennial heart. Basically what we're doing is allowing guns to enter Mexico. That's what we were doing. And then we're like, let's just see what happens. Haha, party. All right. So ATF agents in Arizona were using this controlled delivery method for decades into Mexico. And the most recent precedent was Operation Wide Receiver, run out of Tucson in 2006 and 2007 under President George W. Bush's administration. Then agents watched hundreds of weapons, AR-15s, AK-47s, like Colt 38 pistols, being sold to straw purchasers. These were men and women hired for the job who went to retail stores and gun shops to buy the firearms, who passed background checks and then signed the forms, and once they left the stores, handed the weapons over to smugglers who brought them into Mexico, basically. Then the ATF hoped to build a bigger case against arms trafficking networks, but after years of delay, the prosecutors ended up charging only low-level buyers, mostly for committing paperwork violations. So, only 64 of the 474 firearms sold during the operation were recovered. So, what does this mean? This means that the United States knowingly sent American guns into Mexico because we thought we were going to big bad guy action movie, Gone in 60 Seconds, Fast and Furious, Domino, do this huge plan and recover them later and then charge everybody involved in the guns. We did not. This did not happen. We only managed to catch a few people on low-level paperwork, and less than a quarter of the guns were even actually recovered. So what did we actually do? We just sent like over 400 guns into Mexico in one operation alone. All right? That's what's happening. So Mike Detty, a licensed firearms dealer who served as a confidential informant for the ATF, was so upset by how the agents handled the operation that he poured his outrage into a book. Despite failures, agents continued using this tactic in other cases, sending weapons to Mexico where they lost track of them. They allowed people who were known to law enforcement for being involved in selling and smuggling drugs and guns to continue their activities. They could have stopped the men who procured some of the firearms the Zetas used to kill ICE agent Jaime Zapata and wound his partner Victor Avila during an ambush of their armored SUV in the Mexican state of San Luis Potosi, but they did not. Yeah. Fast and Furious was a reiteration of these earlier schemes and a repetition of their failures. Over a year and a half between September 2009 and December 2010, a joint task force comprised of federal officials from the ATF, FBI, DEA, and ICE working under the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Arizona let over 2,000 guns walk into Mexico. And instead of arresting suspects as soon as they identified them, agents waited. Straw purchasing cases were hard to pursue, though, according to the author who's in charge of the Phoenix Division who wrote about this in a memo he sent to ATF headquarters. So this basically was this totally botched bad idea. And we don't have to read the rest of the article. The point of it is, you get the picture, that here in the conclusion, deaths in Mexico, rather than being a liability, are profitable to the U.S. gun industry. And ATF agents have made horrible mistakes with these gun-walking operations. Not because they were actually trying to strengthen gun control laws in the United States. It didn't actually help anything. So, we talked about yesterday the way that banks in the United States profit from drug sales in Mexico. We also talked about a little bit about how the gun industry in the United States profits, but I think this is a better explanation of just how complicit the U.S. government is in this. So when we talk about the U.S. government doesn't actually care about what's going on with people selling drugs anywhere in the world, right? We talk about this. This is further proof of it. We don't actually care. We just run these weird action movie style operations thinking they will bring these agents glory or something, and it usually falls apart and is mismanaged and total BS. So that is kind of one of the three things I wanted to reference. Can you hear Zay? She's really mad about something. I don't know what she's mad about. You can hear her? She's in another room. That's wild. Yeah. She talks a lot. A lot. She's always, yeah. She gonna come fight me. Somebody made a clip compilation of Zay attacking me, and I showed my partner. So funny. Yeah. So, and then of course we know, yes, as somebody said, we brought drugs into America. Yeah, we import drugs, we profit off drugs, we do the drugs. Like, this is not a Mexico bad kind of situation. So the next thing I wanted to talk about before we wrap this up is that there is this book, Oswaldo Zavala's book, Drug Cartels Do Not Exist, Narco Trafficking in U.S. and Mexican Culture. I just wanted to give this. I have not read this book, but this is what my recommended reading for myself is. So I wanted to share that all with you. Okay. So this is this. And what I found was an interview with him talking about these issues kind of recently on a different podcast, and I wanted to play just a couple of clips from that interview for us, and then we'll get into our regularly scheduled program, okay? So, here is the interview, and I have some specific timestamps played out. 10:19 to 11:03. Does it feel like I'm a real streamer, guys? I did some prep work.
And then, of course, in Mexico and elsewhere. And this language has been circulating since the late 1940s, but more more radically since the 1970s. When the idea of a cartel first appeared in U.S. public discussions, I located it all the way to a public hearing, where the DEA seems to have been employed for the first time, in a congressional hearing, trying to justify its activities, its operations in Mexico, and also using it to present to the U.S. Congress and therefore to the U.S. public Mexican traffickers as a greater threat to U.S. National security. And so whenever you employ this language, what you do is you magnify a problem, that is a significant problem, of course, for, public health and perhaps policing, which is, the drug trade in itself, of course. It's a problem that must be understood and tackled. But when you frame it as a question of a drug cartel engaging in a war with the neighbor country, then of course, the narrative itself produces this alarm, and it brings, of course, radical answers to it. What do we do about it? Well, let's help the neighbor country fight them. Let's give them weapons. Let's push them to militarize the country. Let's bring all the brown people we can in behind bars. Let's start doing some killing.
Okay, so this is the author of the book that I was just showing you, and he's talking about how there's a specific reason why the United States basically markets these issues as cartels rather than individual kind of just drug dealers, right? Once you make this into an organized crime situation, you are able to justify having an equally measured response. You blow up the enemy, and all of a sudden you can blow up your response to it. And now that justifies any sort of imperial action you want to take in Mexico. Right, and we saw that obviously with Venezuela. Well, all of a sudden, they're narco-terrorists. It's something way bigger than just people casually doing or selling drugs or whatever, which Venezuela didn't even have an issue with. But now it's this massive issue that justifies a ground invasion and overthrowing your president. And this is kind of the same thing that he's talking about. You have these kind of low-level drug dealers throughout Mexico, and sure, it's a problem, and sure, it's bad, and a lot of them are backed by the United States. But when you pitch it as there is a drug cartel, all of a sudden you frame it as a war. And if it's a war, anything the United States wants to do is justified. So I thought that was a really, really interesting section. Now, the longer section, this is going to be kind of a long section. This is going to be like 5 minutes-ish long. But I think it's really important and good, and that'll wrap up our Mexico addendum info, and we can do a brief Q&A, and then we'll get into today's actual topic. So thank you guys for bearing with me. I don't love doing current events because it feels like it's so easy to miss things in the moment, but that's part of the learning process. So let's see, we're at 24:47. Hold on.
With, of course, the fact that the U.S. is a country that consumes illegally 2/3 of the world's drugs, right? And that there are drug rings everywhere in the U.S. that you can buy cocaine right outside probably my neighborhood here in Manhattan, where I live, and that the U.S. at the same time is one of the countries with the most complex financial systems that launder money for all kinds of illegal activities, not just the drug trade. And at the same time, right, this is one of the most violent countries, with guns per capita. And what you then have to wonder is, how is it possible, that this country has all the launder money, all the illegal drugs, and all the guns, and yet somehow all the violence seems to happen disproportionately south of the border? Why is it that only Mexicans and Colombians seem to be wanting to kill themselves over this, right? And so there are a lot of omissions in this narrative that just simply don't check out, right? When you consider, for example, and this is, by the way, official data, right, that about 70% of drug profits stay in the U.S., don't even make it back to countries like Mexico or Colombia, that they feel what as I was saying, the financial systems, with money laundering, bank secrecy laws that allow for this money to enter the accounts of people who have become very rich north of the border, our border. And so what is really interesting then is to wonder, why is it that then you get all the money, all the drugs, and we somehow end up with the violence. and,
Yeah.
and that's one thing. And the other part of the question is, how is it that we've seen about 3 decades, especially since 2006 and on, but even before that, even throughout the 1990s, of Mexican and Colombian cooperation with the U.S. in the drug effort, right? You had billions of dollars spent in militarizing Colombia, in militarizing Mexico, right? And yet, every time we up our militarization, the only result we get is more killing, more violence, more endangering communities, all kinds of atrocities being committed in this so-called drug war. And we seem to be wanting more of it. Not the, of course, the citizens, but politicians, and especially people in the U.S., right? And it's never enough, right? We never do enough to appease the vigilant eye of the U.S., which, by the way, doesn't seem to care that all the drugs are being sold in the U.S. streets, right? I mean, the Trump administration is fixated on blowing up boats in the Caribbean coast that maybe have some fentanyl on board, and turns a complete blind eye to the hundreds of labs that are scattered all over the U.S. territory, where you have all kinds of synthetic drugs being produced. And of course, all the drugs that come from the Canadian border, and those that even come directly through shipment companies, in the chemical precursors sent from China to do your own fentanyl on U.S. territory. So, my question then is, if we really consider all those contradictions and all those questions that are unanswered, what you then see is that all the cultural products that we consume that talk about the drug war are just propaganda of U.S. interest and U.S. narratives of the drug war in countries like Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, Bolivia, and so on. And two, that in all of these cultural products, nobody is really seriously thinking the question, right? The fact that the U.S. It's not only hypocritical, but at the same time allowing for a de facto consumption of drugs all across the country, making enormous profits for those selling, and yet blaming at the same time the neighboring countries, right? So I don't think this is really about drugs, right? This is really about U.S. hegemony, U.S. militarism, selling weapons, using this drug war narrative as a form of political, social control. This is about also killing people. When you look at the figures of violence in Mexico, is very systematic, right? That disproportionate number of those killed in this so-called drug wars tend to be young, poor, brown Mexican men.
Okay, so again, for those of you just joining, this is the author of the book Drug Cartels Do Not Exist, who is an academic out of CUNY, C-U-N-Y. And this book has been really relevant. People have been talking about it a lot lately as good context for what's happening in Mexico. And I think it is complicated trying to understand the nature of the interactions between the United States and Mexico when it comes to drug cartels. So yeah, I just wanted to add this because, the general assessment people get is that drug cartels, as we think of them, if they actually exist, it has to be this very, very organized crime thing. And if they are that organized, it takes institutions to support them. And the Mexican government isn't really supporting them, but the American institutions are supporting them. Our banks profit off of the liquidity of their cash. Our gun industry profits off of sales to Mexico. And our law enforcement largely turns a blind eye to it, or even supports it and props it up. We walk, not run, guns into Mexico. So really, if a cartel were to exist insofar as we think of it as an organized crime structure in Mexico, the institution that would be backing it up is the United States. And that's why Comrade Ome, who I told you all to follow, who is a Mexican communist, says that in Mexico, we view cartels as an arm of American imperialism. We don't view that as a local problem. And the United States doesn't give a fuck about the cartels. They don't want to stop the cartels. And how we reconcile these two ideas basically is we realize that if the cartels do exist, they exist as an American fabrication or creation that has a material impact with guns that we walk there into the country. And we use this as a rhetorical talking point to maintain American imperial control and hegemony in the region. And this is what we do. And why does it benefit us to craft a narrative that everybody in Mexico is a lawless, drug-crazed lunatic? Well, because then it serves as justification for us to continue to bully Mexico and push them around. And this stems from, a century back when we were heavily involved in imperialism in Mexico, when we were controlling their railroads, when we were taking control of as many of their natural resources and mines as we could. And the general narrative was that they were savages who were unfit to govern themselves. And we see this as an extension of that same idea. They're lawless savages. We've got to whip them into shape and make sure they crack down on their weird drug doing and drug toting ways. Meanwhile, the clients buying the drugs are in the United States. The guns they're using come from the United States. And the banks that are housing their profits are U.S. banks. And the banks need that money. So that, I think, is why I just wanted to kind of wrap it all up in a nice little bow before we got into today's topic. So thank you guys for allowing me to double back on yesterday's topic here before we get into new stuff for today. So, any questions before we get into our regularly scheduled program? And we start looking at what's going on in today's news. And it doesn't have to be relevant questions. You can ask whatever you want. We don't necessarily have a plan. This is also a good opportunity if you have a recommendation for news that you want to put forward, put it in the chat, and we can start keeping track of things. How's stream working out for you so far? I really enjoy it. I really like it. I feel like when I first joined TikTok, I felt like I had a community there, and then my presence blew up too big and started attracting a bunch of randos. And now I feel like this is the replacement. Because I never used social media, professionally. I always used it throughout my life because I like the community that the internet can bring. And I lost that with my TikTok account majorly when it got too big. So I feel like streaming is good because I feel like it is more community vibes. It's great seeing people I recognize in the chat every single day and talking to people, and it just makes it feel more rewarding to be on the internet again. Okay, so we have a rec from Virgo about Iran. So Iran is a good thing. How would you respond to someone who says tankies are doing voter suppression for the right? Do people say that? It's kind of cool. We made it. I would say that the most voter suppression that occurs in the United States is by the Democratic Party, right? I mean, Republicans do it too. It's not like Republicans don't, but it is by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party literally sues third parties to keep them off of ballots. The Democratic Party engages in massive shaming campaigns. They spread voter disinformation where they tell you your vote doesn't matter if you don't vote for us. I mean, they're the biggest culprits of it on the planet. Have you seen Zheng Yu's debunk of the Kim Jong-un as a ceremonial leader narrative? I can link the video if you want. No, I haven't seen it, but I also would not agree that he's a ceremonial leader. I don't think he's a ceremonial leader. He actually is a leader, but his roles are not what people think they are. So as head of the Worker Party, he has immense ideological influence over the country, which is a very, very respected and big role. And as the head of the State Affairs Commission, or committee, I believe, commission. I think it's commission. He is in charge of their whole military and all of their foreign diplomacy. So yeah, he is not a ceremonial leader. I don't think that is correct to say. So I would agree with that. Oh, 2 hydrates. Earlier on, okay, this is funny. They said tankies do voter suppression by saying vote blue no matter who is bad. Vote blue no matter who is voter suppression. You're literally trying to control the votes. These people are deranged. They're not very smart. They're not sending their brightest. And this is what I mean, where I'm like, anybody with half a brain cell recognizes that liberalism is a dead ideology. We've seen the contradictions of liberalism. Liberalism has failed. There are 2 options now, 2 viable options to move forward in this path, right? Fascism, barbarism, fascism, or communism, socialism. These are your 2 options. And the people who are still clinging to liberalism are so far gone. They're in the trash heap of history. They don't realize they're getting passed by. And one side that people are going to, fascism, that is scary. That is a very, very, very real threat. And communists and socialists are the only people who seem to recognize that. So when we talk about these people getting left behind, it is when we say the stats, 1/3 of Gen Z aged adults have a favorable view of communism. 2/3 have a favorable view of socialism. Thank God, we're winning. We're recruiting. We're building. It's happening for us. But fascism is winning and recruiting and building as well, right? 30% of Gen Z adults support the kind of proto-fascist MAGA agenda, We know. So this is the actual battle going on. It's the same battle that's gone on since Mussolini, right? Of the fascists versus the communists. And I've always said this, you're going to see histories of fascists versus the communists fighting, while the liberals look on and go, oh no, and largely do nothing. And they are politically obsolete, and they are failing to realize they are politically obsolete, which is leading to them lashing out because they're not willing to accept it. They are failing to accept the fact that everybody else around them knows. Conservatives know it. Conservatives know liberals are politically obsolete. Fascists know it. And socialists know it. Communists know it. We know it. They don't. And they're clinging to whatever they can, right? But the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the reports that the Democratic Party didn't want to release about the failures of their party. The proof is in the Republican Party abandoning liberalism as we think of it as a classical liberal concept and moving just towards fascism because they find it's more effective. The proof is in the numbers everywhere we look, right? So we all know it. And they don't. And that's why they're lashing out. That's why they're vote blue no matter who. They're like, you have to, because they have no compelling argument. Because liberalism is a failed ideology. Okay, we have another recommendation, a Politico tariff, kind of local. No clue no matter who. Yes. Any recs or video documentaries about the DPRK besides Citizens of Pyongyang? You were looking last night, but they're all heavy on the propaganda. Yes. If you look at my link tree, I have a resource doc full of info. It's over 100 hours of learning material. It's anchored around 6 different books, I believe, maybe more, and some academic text that I think that you will quite like. And there is some pop culture stuff in there too, so you don't get totally bored. There's some videos and things like that. Earlier on TikTok, we talked about American Marxist parties. What's the RCA and what's your opinion on them? Are they helpful or distracting from other Marxist works? So they were Trotsky historics, so I'm not a Trotskyist. I'm a Marxist-Leninist, so I'm not going to tell you to join RCA because I have different politics than them. They believe in a concept called like forever revolution. I believe in communism in one country. And I think their ideology is actually harmful and bad. So I won't tell you to join RCA if you have any other Marxist options around you. I will always tell you to go with the Marxist-Leninist Party first. You might have local options. Where I live in LA, there are local Marxist-Leninist orgs. If there are not, one of the 3 federal Marxist-Leninist orgs will probably be available near you. It's PSL, FRSO, CPUSA. And for those of you who are like, CPUSA, I'm like, I know. They used to not be explicitly Marxist-Leninist, but they've had a lot of internal structure, restructuring, and changing. And now they are a Marxist-Leninist org. So I am comfortable recommending CPUSA again to you as an org. So I would say look at those before you do anything Trotskyist aligned ever. But again, you should know that's my personal bias. If you talk to a Trotskyist, they're going to tell you to join a Trotskyist org and not a Marxist-Leninist org. And I will say, I think joining an org is so important that if you don't have any Marxist-Leninist orgs near you and you only have RCA, it's better than nothing, but no, they're going to be real weird about China and they're going to be real weird about most of the USSR. And you just have to know that, okay? I've not seen DPRK explained on YouTube. RCA just started. They told me they're both Trot and ML. Yeah, they think that they're Marxist-Leninists, I think. Sometimes. They think they're doing Lenin. I think. It's weird. They're weird. And, obviously this has to do with the split between Stalin and Trotsky that occurred, right? So, I think Trotskyism is harmful because I think that it prohibits progress, right, for socialism and communism. And I think it also focuses on exporting revolutionary ideology to places that have not yet developed sufficient class consciousness yet. So to me, anybody who looks at China lifting 800 million people out of poverty and is like, no, I hate it. I'm like, girl, you're right. Your priorities are cooked. Like, your priorities are fucked. If you look at China and you cannot agree they are doing socialism and it is good, I don't trust your intentions with Marxism. I think you're more in it to have an ideologically pure thing that makes sense to you and feel special in your heart rather than actually materially helping people and improving their lives. So I am very, very, very skeptical of that, and I think that's bad. I think anybody trying to tell you what China is doing is bad is not somebody who is trustworthy or has your best interest in mind. So that's really the biggest thing. The second biggest thing is that I think that focusing on the idea of forever revolution, one, discourages growth internally within countries who do have worker revolutions, who want to be socialist and control their own destiny. I think distracts from them being able to build and create something good and positive. I also think that it is harmful for the countries being targeted as potentially having the next worker revolutions. We've seen historically that you cannot force a revolution from the outside. That doesn't happen. You have to wait until these people develop class consciousness and take it upon themselves, to have their own worker revolutions, and I think Trotskyists, in their eagerness to export the revolution, will sometimes back revolutionary attempts places that are not sufficiently ready, and that actually is a disservice and has a setback for communism in those places. So I would actually love one day to talk to a Trotskyist, just no judgment. Like, we know we're going to disagree, but I need to understand it, because I do not understand how they are reading the same text as us and coming up with this game plan. It is one of the most perplexing things to me on the planet, and you'll hear me say I understand a lot of left-wing political ideologies. I've had a lot of left-wing political ideologies in my course of development. I do believe all roads lead you to Marxist-Leninism. I don't understand how you become a Trotskyist, so I'm not going to recommend that ever. If that makes sense to you guys. Would I rather join the DSA or a Trot org? That's such a hard question. I used to say Trot org over DSA, but I know that there are some DSA branches that have Marxist-Leninist caucuses in them, and if there's a Marxist-Leninist caucus in a DSA branch near you, that might be better. But again, if the option presents itself, I'm always going to tell you to just join a Marxist-Leninist org. But I do think it's important to get organized. So if you don't have that option, I guess just use your best judgment, man. It's not ideal. Yeah, the RCP is the Avakian one. That's just like a weird cult around Bob Avakian, basically. It feels white savory. That's the vibe I get from Trotskyism too. I don't know. I'm just like, this is weird. Forever revolution basically means, like, you can't do communism in one country, so everyone in the world has to do communism, which it is true that if you are just a country and you have a worker revolution, you are going to be specifically targeted by capitalist imperialism, by capitalist destabilization attempts every step of the way. That is true. We also do believe in the inevitability of revolution for workers in every country. As Marxist-Leninists, we believe that is true. However, we think focusing on that as the main avenue through which to gain worker power and talk about revolution is harmful, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah. So again, I'm full disclosure, Trotskyism has never fucking made sense to me. So if you find a Trotskyist who explained it to you better, how their ideology works in their head, great. It's not clicking to me. I've never understood that ideology. I do not understand how you get there from what we found. So, that's that. Okay, so does anybody else have any other news stories they want to recommend for us to look at today? So far we have the Democratic Party. We have Iran updates. War in Iran. Anybody else have anything they're curious about? We have an Epstein file update. We're looking at mainstreamy newsy too. Ooh, local to me in Glendale, a family of 5 was running an illegal theft ring. Haha. You want to join PSL, but you've heard they have SA scandals and protected predators in leadership. You haven't had anything concrete about that. When you find the concrete story, you're going to be like, oh. I mean, look, I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm going to tell you that I heard about that story and I looked it up and I was like, really? Felt like a nothing burger to me. So to the point where I was just like, I don't know if this is like Fed shit or what, but this is literally what happened is, from what I read, is that there was a couple who were both members, and the guy cheated on the girl with another girl who was a member, and then somebody got an STD and they were like, this is assault, and then the party was like, this is a private matter, right? Like, you handle this privately, and that was kind of it. And then one of the people was like, you need to kick everybody out but me, and they were like, this is not like an us thing. And that's kind of how that worked. So that's what I read, and I was like, this is it? So, and to me, what I would look for in a revolutionary party is, number one, making sure that personal matters do not distract from your revolutionary work. Those are personal grievances, right? So to me, I'm like, I wouldn't want, if my party was taking personal grievances like that seriously, to me, that's not the role of your party, right? That's not for your party. That's not what your party is there for. That would actually be a red flag to me. That would be a major distraction to me, because that just gets in the way of revolutionary work that you are trying to do. And I don't think that's the right avenue for those things. Just because you're all in the party, I don't think that means the party is there to resolve your interpersonal issues with each other, right? Yeah, people really blow stuff up online. Yeah, but and again, look at me. Millionaire landlord. Racist transphobe. People really blow stuff up online and make shit up. So when I looked into the actual story, I was like, are you kidding? Like, that to me, I was like, whoa. All right. So look into it yourself, though. All right? Look it up yourself if you want. To me, it was nothing burger. You might have different values than me. You might have different interpretation of it than me. Look it up. Decide for yourself. Okay. So we've got the California governor race. That's it as well. And to me, the way they handled it is how I would want a party to handle it. So I couldn't be upset about that. Steve Bannon's landlord? Oh, this guy. Billionaire populist candidate. You got contact back from the Cuban flotilla about joining them. Let's fucking go. All right. Yay. Okay, that's exciting. I have something secret cooking in the works that I might be doing volunteer-wise as well. But I'm not supposed to talk about it yet because it might not go through. So, we're plotting. We're planning. We're concerned about Cuba. Okay, and then Tiananmen stuff recirculating with the Olympics. Oh, okay, that's great. That's really interesting. Okay, I think I have some good options. Here's what we got. Okay, here's what I think. Revolutionary professionalism. That's what I would expect out of an org, right? That's what I would expect out of an org. And if you've been in smaller orgs, less disciplined orgs, you've probably seen them blow up over interpersonal issues that actually have nothing to do with your revolutionary work. And you've seen it derail movements. And that, to me, I'm like, I don't have time for that, right? I want an org that handles things professionally and with discipline and knows when something is their issue and when something is not. And that's what I look for anyway. All right, so here are our options. Iran. We'll do general U.S. politics. Okay, so this will be a governor race, weird billionaire landlord guy, Democratic Party stuff, that kind of a thing. All right. Then we also have Epstein Files update. That seems like a mini. This is more Iran. Okay, And China. China, Alysa Liu. Spies. Okay, so those are options. Did we get it? Did I say them okay? I know, I hope I get to as well. We'll see how it goes. Yeah. Oh, Carr. Should I join a big tent environmentalist party with some socialists and anti-gender self-recognition Marxist-Leninist party? Oh, Trotsky is, or try to find I would say try to find a tiny Marxist-Leninist party, but if you can't, do the big tent environmentalist party. Our Marxist-Leninist orgs, all of them, I think, kind of recognize the Green Party here, which is our equivalent of that, environmentalist, general socialist, and we're like, we see you, we respect you, and that works pretty well. Okay, so everybody, please go vote in the poll. Please go vote in the poll. Vote or gulag? The environmentalist crowd gets racist so quickly. What a world we live in, you guys. What a world we live in. Vote or gulag? Okay, so everybody's voting. Do you guys have any more general questions you want to ask? Or what do you want to talk about when everybody's voting? Vote in the poll or 15 years in a hard labor camp for re-education. First time chat, Marxist Meyer, 1917. The new Workers' Party is coming along. I'd recommend looking at their chapter locations if you need more options. Oh, okay, cool. You love the audiobook? Yay. I'm literally just talking about socialism and communism without saying the words. You'll never hear me say the words socialism or communism in the book, but different chapters are talking about different entry-level concepts of it, which I think is cool. Do I think EU will align with China? I think the EU is desperate and floundering. I think they're realizing they have no friends, and they're like, oh shit, we need bigger military, and they might go cowering to Russia or China for protection. What are the benefits of joining a small party instead of a big tent party? So it depends, right? I think depending on the big parties, some big parties can actually be more hands-off and you don't get as much action in them. I've had that experience with larger parties before, but not every large party. Some larger parties are better. Smaller parties, you are going to hit the ground running. There's going to be more stuff you can do and you can have more ownership over projects and things like that. Could be nice. Radical environmentalists when you tell them that no Inuit people can't actually go vegan concerning there are no plants. Yeah. True. Oh, China. Okay. All right. Ooh, 394 viewers. Okay, thank you, everybody. Yay. Oh. How is the queer bitch? I thought we had the queer bitch in here before. Free Turkestan. I thought, are you trolling? You're trolling. You've got to be trolling. I see you in here. You're not a weirdo. You would not betray me, queer bitch. You are trolling me. I'm like, oh, is this just a similar username? Yes. All right, let's go all in on China. We're talking about China today, baby. Okay, so the story we've got here is from the Daily Mail, a notoriously reliable news source that definitely will be reporting responsibly. Oh no, hold on. It's still like a general report. I need to update my screen capture. All right, there we go. That's it. That's what we're looking at. Look at this lovely angel. Style icon. So, American figure skater Alysa Liu may stand on the brink of Olympic history, but her remarkable career took a sinister turn 4 years ago when her and her father were targeted by Chinese spies. The 20-year-old, who has been dubbed the Blade Angel, great name, has become a fan favorite among American viewers at this year's Winter Olympics in Milan Cortina. She can end a 24-year drought for American women in Olympic figure skating on Thursday night, but must chase down Japanese rivals Ami Nakai and Kaori Sakamoto in the free skate to win gold. This is a political battle. Because she is of Chinese descent, right? Yes. Blade Angel does go hard. I have to tell you guys, I've only seen her aesthetic outfit photos. I don't know much about her. So she's American. She's a U.S. figure skater, yes. But she's of Chinese descent. Okay. This is interesting. Oh, Comrade Degan. You feel like living in a gulag with better living conditions than what you have right now. I'm so sorry. Yeah, her hair is beautiful. I do know this. She's Chinese American. Okay, great. We're up to date. So if she won, this would be a big political blow to Ami Nakai, Kaori Sakamoto. This would be retribution for everything Japan has done to the people of China. Politically, I feel like we need the win as China stands. We need this. Oh, her dad left China because he was involved in Tiananmen. This is a good connection. Oh, you were so right. Oh my gosh. Okay. She's one of 6 siblings that her dad did with all white women egg donors. What? Okay. You know what? Protect Blade Angel at all costs. We love her. The dad situation. We all have weird family members. We're going to have to get into this. I will say I am still rooting for Alysa Liu to win because of her Chinese descent. I do think still Japan has to pay for what they did to China, right? At this point. And this is how they're going to pay, I think. She did win. Oh, she did. Oh, okay, great. See, I don't follow anything. I don't follow sport ball. Okay, she won. Yay. Okay, she did it. Great. Wait, she was born in Clovis and gave a shout out to Fresno? No, the lore is insane. Are you serious right now? She's born in Clovis. I have some reference points for. I can tell you everything about what born in Clovis means, okay? We can talk about this. Okay, this is the most Madeline story ever. So we have somebody born in Clovis who shouted out Fresno, whose dad had to leave China because of Tiananmen Square. For those of you who don't know, I am from Fresno. I have a Fresno tattoo on my chest. There it is. It is blown out because I got it in Fresno, and that's just what happens when you get tattoos in Fresno. Her dad seems like he would move to Clovis is also the vibe I am picking up. So for those of you who don't know, context for this. Fresno is what we call a minority-majority city. The majority of people in Fresno are not white. Fresno is also very, very harshly segregated. There is an east-west street that goes through Fresno called Shaw Avenue, which is called the Mason-Dixon line of Fresno. It's a very intense segregation. So most people are not white. They live south of Shaw. But the wealthy white people have an enclave basically north of Shaw. And wealthy is relative in Fresno. Fresno has the 7th highest concentrated poverty levels in the country. And that's based on federal poverty, but it's in California. So imagine the 7th poorest city in the country based off federal levels. Now put it in California prices. Okay, that's what Fresno is dealing with. So Fresno is a very poor place. So when we say the wealthy, we mean people who make like I don't know, $80,000 a year or something like that. They're like very, very rich in Fresno. They live north of Shaw. So Clovis actually became a target of kind of white flight. Clovis is a town that when I was growing up was basically run by the KKK. The KKK was in charge of their sheriff's department. And one of my like boyfriends I had when I was young basically had the story. He grew up in Clovis, but he was Mexican, and he was invited to a barbecue one day, just in someone's backyard. And he goes to the barbecue and he's like, oh, there's a stage set up. That's weird. And he's there with like 3 other of his friends in high school or whatever. And he realizes pretty quickly that they're actually at a KKK meeting. And this is a KKK meeting to recruit, and his friend from school was like, you're going to love it, come, it's just a normal barbecue, meet some people. So my boyfriend was like, I'm Mexican. When they find out I'm Mexican, this is not going to go well. So he goes to his other friend, he's like, we got to get the fuck out of here. And his other friend's like, yeah, we do. And they go to their third friend, and they're like, we got to go, this is a KKK rally. And the third friend is like, I think I'm going to stay. I want to check it out. Wild. Okay. So then cut to a couple weeks later, my boyfriend is he's a drug dealer, and he has a bag of drugs, and he's driving around late at night. He's like, oh, I'm falling asleep. So he starts doing stimulants in his car to try to stay awake while driving. Not very safe. But you know, we're teenagers. What are you going to do? And he sees cop lights behind him, and he's like, oh, I'm fucked, right? We're talking controlled substance stimulants, okay? So the cops pull him over, and he's got this bag of drugs on his lap. And he's like, what do I do? What do I do? And in his frenzied movements to try to hide it, he accidentally hits the bag, and just white powder explodes everywhere. All over him, all over the car, just covered in drugs. And because he was a drug dealer, it was a large bag. It was not like a little dime bag or whatever. It was a bit large bag. And he is sitting there frozen in panic, realizing like his whole life's about to be over, as this cop is walking to his window. So the windows roll down, and the cop peers in and is like, what we got going on here, right? Wild. And boyfriend looks up and is like, doesn't know what to do, freaking out. And the cop is like, hey, I recognize you. You were at so-and-so's barbecue like 2 weeks ago, right? Yeah, I saw you. I was there. Yeah, the fucking Klan rally. And the boyfriend is like, yeah, I was there. Yeah. And the guy's like, you know what? You seem like a good kid. Why don't you just take a few minutes to get yourself cleaned up and you carry on with your night? Stay safe there, okay? So yeah, confirmed. The sheriff's deputy was in the KKK. But my boyfriend didn't get arrested. So, you know, a win is a win, I guess. That's Clovis. That is Clovis. Okay, so this is Clovis. So a lot of people who wanted to white flight from Fresno went and settled in Clovis. Now, Clovis is aggressively conservative. They have something middle of Fresno, okay? Surrounded by I don't know, like gang run territory. They have something called Big Hat Days, which is their version of a rodeo. They have like statues. Their old town Clovis is very like country western. They have statues of cowboys. People walk around in cowboy hats. Like it is like right wingerville 2.0. Like you've never seen anything quite so intense. So this is the town that Alysa Liu is from, apparently. All right. So I felt like that was relevant context for you guys to have. When I say, oh, Clovis, that means something. And this is what that means. A fucking Klan rally. A fucking Klan rally. Oh, yeah. My boyfriend's like, yeah, we should never talk to that guy again. He's in the fucking KKK. Like, okay. And the KKK did have a presence in Clovis, certainly. But my dad even has stories. So my dad was a punk rocker, for those of you who don't know. My dad was like a 20-year-old punk rocker when I was born. And my mom was like, turns out I actually don't want to have a kid. And like, it's like, I don't know. So my dad basically was my primary caregiver for the first 12 years of my life. So my dad told me this story about going to a Civil War reenactment in Fresno, and it was like a normal thing, whatever, and then the Klan showed up to cheer on the South. And I think they thought they would be like received fine, but my dad was like, oh no, like the Civil War reenactment stopped because they were in Fresno now. They weren't in Clovis, they were in Fresno. And everybody, the South, the North, everybody stopped and just started attacking the Klan members and beating the shit out of them, basically, to be like, get the fuck out of here. Like, no. So in Fresno, the street signs are green, and in Clovis, the street signs are brown. So when you grow up in Fresno, you grow up with a little rhyme in your head so you stay safe, which is see brown, turn back around. Like, you don't go into Clovis because it's dangerous, especially if you're not white. So That's the more context. I'm so sorry. That is that. All right. So this is where our lovely Blade Angel is from. Absolutely bonkers. Absolutely wild. And Liu's remarkable career saw her briefly retire in 2022, but she returned in early 2024, and last year she became the first American to win a world title since 2006. She's already helped the U.S. win gold in the team event at this year's Games, but now Liu can become the first American woman to stand atop an Olympic podium since Sarah Hughes at the 2002 Salt Lake City Games. However, Liu's life took a dark turn when she and her father, Arthur, were targeted in a spying operation before the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing. Okay. Arthur left China in his 20s as a political refugee after protesting the communist government following the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. We have to learn about this man. He eventually settled in the San Francisco Bay Area and put himself through law school. So, worthwhile context. There was no Tiananmen Square massacre, and that is not controversial to say. Like, the Tiananmen Square massacre is one of the most easily debunked things on the planet, like, ever. People who were journalists were there, said that didn't happen. We have WikiLeaks documents from diplomats from other Western countries even who were there who were like, that didn't happen. I actually do have a Twitter thread I made of this. It might be easy for us to access in the moment really fast. So let me see if I can find it very quickly. It might just give all the links and info we need. Okay, so I do have this. All right, so this is, I'm so sorry, this is just for my Twitter, but I did this once before. So here's what I said back in 2025. For anyone not familiar with this situation, there were real peaceful student protesters calling for more pure forms of socialism happening in Tiananmen Square that day, right? Hakeem's video was taken down from YouTube for a while for saying that did not happen. Okay, so, we're going to tread lightly because this is apparently a hot censorship topic. Okay, so I'm just going to let you guys, I'm going to show you what other people have reported, right? It's not wrong for me to tell you what other people have reported. So there were students protesting. They were not, as this makes it sound, protesting the communist government. This makes it sound like they were anti-communist, pro-capitalist protesters. They were not. The students in Tiananmen Square were upset with the Dengist reform policies, which were market liberalization reforms that we now see have been actually very successful for China. But at the time, students were worried that this would be more of a move to capitalism and less communist. So these were actually pro-communist student protesters worrying their government was becoming reformist. And that is who was actually protesting in Tiananmen Square that day. So they were actually allowed to come and go from the square peacefully. However, there was also a separate group that were CIA-backed insurgents who saw the protest as an attempt to co-opt it and basically create a false color revolution style uprising to actually try to overthrow the communist government of China. And they actually did not even make it really to the square. They tried to join in and co-opt that movement, and they were involved in massive amounts of violence in streets around and nearby Tiananmen Square, but not in Tiananmen Square. They actually started beating people to death and lighting them on fire. These were extremely, extremely violent people who were, basically doing this. Oh, we have a creep? Creepy? Okay. So we're talking about Alysa Liu, and we're talking about how, first of all, she's from Clovis, which is a super weird right-wing town that was attached to the town I grew up in that was run by the KKK. And also about how her dad had to leave China after Tiananmen Square. So we're good. I don't think Alysa ever lived in Clovis. I'm speculating the surrogate mother may have lived there, but she grew up in the Bay Area in Oakland. Oh, okay, that's helpful to know. Okay. We'll look into that a little bit more. This is what I have shown. This is actually a screenshot from, oops, sorry, not this one. From an article. I'm so sorry, I don't have it in this screenshot, so we'll have to look. You can, if you screenshot this and then you reverse search the text, you'll be able to find the article that it's actually in. The article reports weapons were destroyed on the steps of the monument that was inside Tiananmen Square, and this would have been difficult to do covertly. The reporter and many others were wandering around that day, and some were constantly stationed near the monument in Tiananmen Square, and none of the correspondents were known to see any weapons being destroyed. Articles also reports The lights on the square were extinguished at 4 a.m. This is confirmed by 3 people who were on the square all night, 2 Chinese students and 1 French correspondent. The central theme of the Wenwei Po article is that troops subsequently beat and machine gunned students in the area around the monument, and that a line of armored vehicles cut off their retreat. So this is the narrative Westerners believe about Tiananmen Square. But witnesses say that armored vehicles did not surround the monument. They stayed at the north end of the square, and that troops did not attack students clustered around the monument. So again, you had 2 things happening. You had students who were protesting, and then you had this violent CIA-backed color revolution attempt. And actually, the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, was trying to keep students safe from that group. So they actually were trying to encourage students to leave the square when this fighting broke out. And it was kind of chaos. So a lot of people are like, these stories coming out didn't really make sense. Several other foreign journalists were near the monument that night as well, and none are known to report that students were attacked. Witnesses gave the same account. While troops were shooting in all areas around the square, they did not attack students in the square. And instead, the students and a pop singer named Hu Dejian were negotiating with troops, and they decided to leave at dawn between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. to try to do it safely. And the students all filed out together. Chinese television shows scenes of students leaving. A few could have remained. So, yeah. All right. So that's important. The witnesses do not definitely assert that nobody was killed in the center of the square. Some workers or students may have remained beside, but they would have numbered not more than in the dozens. And some protesters may also have been intense. They could have been crushed by tanks theoretically, but they would have been a relatively small number. And we don't even know that this happened. So we can't rule out completely that nobody died in the square. But what we can say is that there was no massacre in Tiananmen Square, and that the main goal was to evacuate students safely when the actual fighting broke out around it. So that is really the proper kind of orientation to have about Tiananmen Square. And then these are some photos. So there's a slideshow that goes on where you can see what the violent disruptors on the outskirts were actually doing. This is what they were doing. And some of them are too violent to show. They're literally burned corpses of people they were lighting on fire. Sometimes these soldiers who were unarmed, the PLA members who were unarmed because they were not expecting a violent clash, sometimes they were allowed to escape, but sometimes they were brutally killed by these people doing this uprising on the outskirts of the square. Numerous protesters were armed with Molotov cocktails and guns. In an article from June 5th, 1989, the Wall Street Journal described some of the violence. Dozens of soldiers were pulled from trucks, severely beaten and left for dead. At an intersection west of the square, the body of a young soldier who had been beaten to death was stripped naked and hung from the side of a bus. Oh, sorry, this is graphic, but that is the photo. I will not show it too long. So what really happened here is that there were around 200 to 300 people killed that day in the violent CIA-backed clashes. Around half of them were soldiers or police officers, though. And this did not happen in Tiananmen Square. This happened on the outskirts of Tiananmen Square, and it was a failed color revolution attempt. So this is a compilation of what mainstream news sources at the time had to say about this. CBS News said, "We saw no bodies, injured people, ambulances, or medical personnel. In short, nothing to even suggest, let alone prove, that a massacre occurred in Tiananmen Square." This is from CBS News reporter Richard Roth. Richard Roth's headline, "There was no Tiananmen Square massacre." He does talk about the fighting that happened on the outskirts of town. And this is not a communist. This is not a socialist or a Marxist. He does not love China. He reports with some bias, but even he will tell you this did not actually happen there. And then BBC News, BBC reporter James Miles wrote in 2009, "I was one of the foreign journalists who witnessed the events that night. There was no massacre on Tiananmen Square." New York Times, June 13th, 1989, New York Times reporter Nicholas Kristof, who was in Beijing at the time, wrote, "State television has shown film of students marching peacefully away from Tiananmen Square shortly after dawn as proof that they were not slaughtered." In that article, he also debunked an unidentified student protester who had claimed in a sensational article that Chinese soldiers with machine guns were mowing down peaceful protesters in Tiananmen Square. People did say this. They were most likely funded by the CIA, and I'll get into that in a second and why we say that. Reuters, Graham Earnshaw was in Tiananmen Square on the night of June 3rd. He didn't leave the square until the morning of June 4th. He wrote in his memoir that the military came, negotiated with the students, and made everyone, including himself, leave peacefully. Nobody died in the square. Did people die in China? This person says yes. About 200, 300 people died in clashes in various parts of Beijing around June 4th, and about half of those were soldiers and cops. A WikiLeaks cable from the U.S. Embassy in Beijing also reveals eyewitness accounts of a Latin American diplomat and his wife. They were able to enter and leave the square several times and were not harassed by troops. Remaining with students until the final withdrawal, the diplomat said there were no mass shootings in the square or near the monument in the square where they talked about this. So this is an interesting read. This is a Washington Post article that is behind a paywall sometimes. It's not right now. All right. So the context for this that I think people should know is that this came out in 1989. Media in the United States was not super aware yet that the National Endowment for Democracy is the CIA. And we now know the National Endowment for Democracy is the CIA. We know that. That's the NGO the CIA started. They are congressionally funded. They're funded 100% by Congress. And their goal is now to do overtly out in the open what the CIA used to do covertly, like back in the day. And what ended up happening is in the 1960s and 70s, a lot of investigative journalism pieces came out exposing what the CIA was up to. It was making the CIA look bad. And they decided it would actually be better if they just started an NGO to do some of their operations out in the open. So it wouldn't be a big news story when it broke. And also, as an NGO, they would get more access to other countries to get involved there because they wouldn't officially be an agency of the U.S. government. However, the initial staffers all came from the CIA, and they are still to this day funded by Congress. So, this article from 1989 is before mainstream reporters knew that the National Endowment for Democracy was the CIA. Now we know that. So this article is really, really interesting from when it happened, basically. The phone lines connecting Beijing to the rest of the world were jammed with urgency on Black Sunday as Chinese troops brought a sudden bloody end to student demonstrations in Tiananmen Square, right? And again, we just saw numerous reporters were like, that did not happen. When Liang Heng, founder of a magazine called The Chinese Intellectual, was finally able to reach his chief editor in a panic-stricken late Sunday from New York, the editor only told him two things. I am safe, but I cannot talk. Then he hung up the phone. Through other friends and colleagues in China, Liang learned that 2 editors from his staff and 3 of the magazine's board members are missing, possibly dead. The May issue of the quarterly, delayed initially to better gauge the recent turmoil in China, still goes unpublished. Liang had come from his New York office, where he serves as the magazine's foreign editor, to Washington Thursday and Friday to address the board of directors at the National Endowment for Democracy, a substantial financial backer of the magazine, to tell it what he knows, what he thinks, and what will possibly happen. So we are actually getting an interview here with somebody who is involved in kind of plotting this uprising backed by the National Endowment for Democracy and the CIA and their involvement in Tiananmen Square, which is pretty special. So this is a special little slice of history that I think is really, really fascinating. So the Chinese Intellectual, we know, is CIA propaganda in Beijing. That is what we know based on this. The cover photo in the Chinese Intellectual's first issue in 1984 features a dark room with the door cracked open, brilliant light streaming out. The photo became the magazine's trademark, a symbolic view of new freedoms in a nation that just 20 years ago tried to stamp out all free thought. It was Liang's triumph too, for he'd done some of the stamping. Programmed as a child to spout the wisdom of Chairman Mao's nursery rhymes, he was funneled as a young teen into the Red Guard, which the aged Mao Zedong used as a terrorizing instrument of the Cultural Revolution. As a 12-year-old, Liang and his classmates had published a newsletter attacking their teachers for being too intellectual. One teacher had worn high heels. So, this was a cultural revolution. This was real, and it did target educators disproportionately. It was a response to a real issue going on in China at the time, which is that they were not remembering to defend their revolution. But even the Communist Party of China today, if you look at their formal website, they will tell you, like, hey, yeah, this was a little bit of a messed up, and it set back educational institutions because it primarily targeted educators. They will address that and say that this was probably not the best thing, but the West thinks that, millions of people died in the Cultural Revolution or something like that. There's really no evidence of that, though. Some people did die. Teachers were beaten to death by their students, and it was bad. But I don't think most Westerners think it was like this massive thing where millions of people were killed or something, and not a lot. Of what was actually going on here. So he says he became disenchanted by a lifetime of repression, and his mother, labeled an anti-rightist for the equivalent of dropping a suggestion in her workplace suggestion box, had been banished to work farms. That sounds very CIA coded. His father, a writer-editor of the Hunan Daily in Changsha, found more success until it was deemed that his articles didn't quote Mao enough. I want to say this is bullshit, but it actually could have happened during the Cultural Revolution. I'm not sure. Cultural Revolution was a little kooky. I say that as a China stan. Okay, Cultural Revolution got a little kooky. So, a late-night raid on the family's small apartment disclosed books by intellectuals, Mark Twain among them, and his father was stripped of his duties at the newspaper. He himself, banished from the state basketball team for his parents' ideological failures, wound up at a factory making sludge from spent oils. When China eased up after Mao's death, Liang began studying again and was accepted into the Hunan Teachers College in Changsha in 1977. It was there that he first learned English. 8 years ago, he left China for New York, vowing to record his life in Mao's shadow and somehow help intellectual thought thrive in a country once determined to stamp it out. Originally published for Chinese students studying in the U.S., The Intellectual gained a following in China. So again, this is a U.S.-backed thing, right? The Chinese Intellectual, National Endowment for Democracy. even though its circulation was only 3,000 in China. So Lang said, "This magazine was my dream." Where did he say this? No big deal. Peering out of a window in the NED offices. He's in the National Endowment for Democracy offices. Like, I love my CIA slot magazine. It's my dream. "I began it in this country, hoping that perhaps one day it could eventually be published and distributed in China for China." And it was. His hopes became a reality that year when the January issue rolled off the presses at Beijing's Liaoning Publishing House after being edited and produced for the first time in China. Circulation jumped to 10,000, he said. Reader response was ecstatic. For a time, it seemed the door was propped wide. Now the 35-year-old dissident is not so sure. Having transferred control of the magazine to Beijing, all he can do is wait. So much has changed, he said. One day in 1979, a group of us decided to promote democracy in the streets, again, implying that Marxist-Leninism is not democracy, that communism is not democracy. This is such a lazy language thing. Capitalism is what they always say is synonymous with democracy, right? Capitalism is not democratic. In the United States, we have documented proof that when the masses want something and the people in power, the rich guys don't, they win and we don't. We literally do not have democracy by definition. So this idea that capitalism is synonymous with democracy is such a lazy rhetorical trick that the United States uses all the time. So when you see people say democracy, it's really just capitalism, and it's bullshit because communism, socialism, these are far more democratic than capitalism will ever be. So we went out and yelled the slogans and sang the songs. Then one guard held a gun in front of our chest, and so that was that. End of confrontation. We were isolated. Now it's all across China. As a U.S. citizen, he married American professor Judith Shapiro while studying literature at Hunan Teachers College in 1980. I did not mean to open a dictionary. Lang has been back to China several times to monitor the progress in the nation's recent reform efforts and help gain support for his magazine. "I'm not pessimistic for the long run," he said. "I still believe we have a good future because China is no longer the same." Although China's hardliners have stalled the student reform movement, Lang thinks more military crackdowns will eventually spur popular support. Meanwhile, he is preparing for a war of information. "I really worry about the magazine. After Black Weekend, China is in a terrible situation, and I think more purge, more crackdown is on the way. The staff on the one hand is very angry, but they are also very scared of being arrested or worse." His answer is for foreign supports who flood China with a deluge of radio broadcasts, phone calls, and fax messages encouraging the movement and counteracting what he calls government lies. He thinks the reform movement will survive and that Deng Xiaoping's administration is nearing an end. The Chinese people have completely lost confidence in their leadership. At least it's really a confrontation between the people and the government. And this is crazy because, again, the actual student protesters wanted more communism, not less, right? So we see this conflict. They were protesting the reform elements of Deng, right? Yeah. And they've been telling us China's on the brink of collapse since the 80s. They tell us that all the time, right? Okay, thanks, Virgo. These days, Lang is regarded as a pioneer of sorts for Chinese thinkers and reformists. After his arrival in the United States, he earned his master's degree in literature from Columbia University and secured an initial $200,000 grant from NED, National Endowment for Democracy, the CIA's NGO. A private corporation started in 1983, who knows why, to strengthen democratic efforts worldwide to start his magazine. Absolutely wild. With Shapiro, Lang co-wrote his accounts of his childhood in Son of the Revolution, portraying his mounting distrust and disillusionment with China and during Mao's age, basically. China, however, coincidentally began changing after Son of the Revolution was published in 1983, and the growing interest there in intellectual trends in the West helped start the magazine. So, we're almost done with this. I'll just keep reading it. The quarterly concentrates on filling in the blanks left by years of little to no education about other countries and cultures. One regular column called America, America concentrates on U.S. politics, films, books, pop music, and social issues like AIDS, urban crime, and race relations, all of which fascinates the Chinese, Lang said. With his U.S. passport securely in hand, Lang returned to China in 1984 to see firsthand the beginnings of the country's open-door policy. Lang and Shapiro wrote a second book, After the Nightmare, portraying the effects of the Cultural Revolution on 3 generations. They are now divorced, and he was remarried to Qing Yang, a Chinese musician who studied at Columbia. Last year, he returned to China again and went to visit his older sister, Lang Feng, in Hunan. Feng was a complete radical in the Cultural Revolution. She would have died for Mao, he said. But while Lang was visiting, Feng's daughter came home from school and announced, "Today in school we learned that we should love the party most. Who should I love, you or the party?" My sister's answer surprised me. She said to her daughter, "You should love me and support the party," he says, laughing. Imagine how far she's come. So has the rest of China. You could have never told children that before. As for the Chinese intellectual, that will continue somehow, Lang says confidently. My father reads it, Lang says. He's old, living in a compound provided for old newspaper workers. He's paralyzed from a stroke, but he can still read, and he loves the magazine. It's everything he wanted to but couldn't, and it makes him happy. Okay, so, this is what's going on. So why is this relevant? Well, why this is relevant is that the actual insurgency movement was backed by Chinese newspapers. We know this, newspapers in China. And I actually have a screenshot from the Associated Press's article about this here that I included as well, that says the CIA station chief in China left the country 2 days before Chinese troops attacked demonstrators in the capital Beijing in 1989. This is about the Tiananmen Square. After predicting the military would not act, U.S. officials said. China's government had declared martial law 12 days earlier and moved tens of thousands of troops to the outskirts of Beijing in preparation for removing the demonstrators from Tiananmen Square. And again, these were not the student protesters. These were the kind of insurgents. The CIA had sources among protesters as well as within China's intelligence services, with which it enjoyed a close relationship since the 1970s, said the officials, who spoke on this week on condition of anonymity. For months before June 3rd attack on the demonstrators, the CIA had been helping student activities form the anti-government movement, providing typewriters, facsimile machines, and other equipment to help them spread their message. So we know these kind of student newspapers, whatever, this was CIA. We know this. And this is all what helped prompt the uprising. Yeah, like a retirement home. A compound for retired workers is a retirement home, yeah. So this is screenshots from it. Okay. So this is what actually happened with Tiananmen Square. Now, does anybody remember the name of the woman? I'm going to try to find this woman. Student leader Chai Ling, I think. Maybe it was her. Oh, Rose Tang. Maybe? Do you guys remember who was the woman? Does anybody remember this? This woman who did this interview, how she was like, I wanted everybody to die. I was pushing these protests and I wanted everyone to die. And they didn't. And I'm sad they didn't. Do you guys know who I'm talking about? I'm looking for her name. Oh, it is Chai Ling. It is Chai Ling. Okay, we're going to watch this video now. The one who said it should have been more violent and cried. Yeah, hold on. Hold on. We'll go to the actual. Watch on YouTube.
Chai Ling had successfully resisted the proposal to move the struggle back to the campuses and allied herself once more with those determined to hold the square. On the following morning, she contacted American journalist Philip Cunningham.
I have been feeling very sad recently. The students themselves lack a developed sense of democracy. To be honest, from the day I called for a hunger strike, I knew we would not get any results. Certain people, certain causes are bound to fail. I have been very clear about this all along, but I've made an effort to present a staunch image, to show that we were striving for victory. But deep down, I knew it was all futile. The more involved I got, the sadder I became. I already felt this back in April. All along, I've kept it to myself, because being Chinese, I felt I shouldn't badmouth the Chinese. But I can't help thinking sometimes, and I might as well say it. You, the Chinese, you are not worth my struggle. You are not worth my sacrifice. But then, I can also see that in this movement, there are many people who do have a conscience. There are many decent people among the students, workers, citizens, and intellectuals. The students keep asking, what should we do next? What can we accomplish? I feel so sad. Because how can I tell them that what we are actually hoping for is bloodshed? For the moment when the government has no choice but to brazenly butcher the people. Only when the square is awash with blood will the people of China open their eyes. Only then will they really be united. But how can I explain any of this to my fellow students? And what is truly sad is that some students and some famous, well-connected people are working hard to help the government, to prevent it from taking such measures. For the sake of their selfish interests and their private dealings, they are trying to cause our movement to collapse and get us out of the square before the government becomes so desperate that it takes action. If we allow the movement to collapse on its own, then the government will be able to wipe out all the leaders of the movement, as well as those leaders in the party and in the military who dare to oppose them, who represent the people. Deng Xiaoping has made it very clear that there is a small handful of people, not only in the party.
Yeah, so basically we know that there were people who were, first of all, and remember, she was one of the student organizers who was not part of the Tiananmen protest, but part of the uprising around the square. And remember, we saw the Associated Press article that said that the CIA was giving these people resources to try to start a movement. And we saw one such person who ran a newspaper that was being published and distributed around this time, was funded by the CIA's NGO, the National Endowment for Democracy. And we saw multiple reporters who were like, we saw no bloodshed happen in Tiananmen Square that day. However, we did see fighting happen outside of the square from a different group of people. And this is what was going on there. Right? So, I swear this relates to the Olympics. I promise this relates to the Olympics. I swear. Yeah, this happened under Deng because the students in the square, the actual student protesters in the square, were protesting the liberalization reforms that Deng was making. They were worried their government was going to stop being communist and start to become capitalist. So they were protesting in favor of more socialism and communism because they were afraid. We now know, obviously, Deng's reforms did not inhibit the growth and progress of China on its socialist path, which is great. But they were worried, and that makes sense. I might have been worried too if I was them, right? But these people within the square were not massacred. However, 300 to 400 people around the square when fighting broke out amongst different groups were killed, and around half of them were police officers and soldiers from China. And that was a different group of people. So the woman we just saw speak, she was from that different group of people. And what they were fighting for was an end to communism and socialism altogether. So they were mad at Deng as well, but because they thought he was too communist. They wanted to have this capitalist uprising. They were backed by the CIA. They were backed by the National Endowment for Democracy, which was the CIA's NGO. And they were really hoping for the Chinese government to murder a bunch of innocent students inside the square. And the Chinese government did not. And that was actually very, very upsetting for them because they wanted the Chinese government to kill a bunch of innocent protesting students so that they could be like, see how evil communism is. Now we have to go capitalist. And yeah, this did not happen. So, that's pretty wild, right? Oh my gosh, yay! The deprogram episode. I'm so glad. Thank you. I love the deprogram, guys. But this is really what was going on here. And then, of course, we have the famous Tiananmen Square tank guy video, which contextualizes that. Let's watch the video, and then we'll get back to Alysa Liu's dad, which was a trip.
No one knows how many people have died in the crackdown. We may never know. Our own CBS News review of hospital figures indicates that at least 300 have died. The figure may be as high as 3,000 or more. Many were civilians who went into the street unarmed to challenge the military and were mowed down by machine gun fire or run over by tanks. But amazingly, people were still defying the army today. Richard Roth has one story.
It was noontime today in the center of Beijing when a man walked to the middle of the Avenue of Eternal Peace, which, as it happened, was already occupied. He walked to the middle and stood there. The man was alone. The tank was not. It wasn't just a single tank he stopped. There were 18 tanks and armored carriers in this convoy, and while he talked to the crew and ignored the gunfire, he stopped all of them. One man alone, of course, can't stop an army. Except for a moment, that's exactly what happened here. For 3 minutes in the middle of the day, an army was stopped by a man who stood still. A man who'd made up his mind, it seems, though why we just don't know. But when bystanders rushed in to save this stubborn soul, it wasn't easily done. He was pushed away at last, faceless in the crowd. Safe, we think, but in a city verging on calamity.
So yeah, that's the famous Tank Man. And you know, the CBS reporting 300 to 3,000, who knows? They were actually, it was probably 300, maybe 300 or 400 people died. And again, half of them were soldiers and police officers. And again, the violent clashes on the outskirts. Remember the pictures I showed you? People were being attacked by CIA-backed insurgents who were trying to overthrow their government. Very, very obviously, we know that, right? There's no doubt about that. So yeah, obviously most people don't know Tank Man lived. What they also don't know is that those tanks were leaving Tiananmen Square. Those tanks were coming away from the square. He was actually telling them to go back and fight more. And they were like, no, we're leaving. So all of the context was completely kind of lost from that, which is very, very interesting. Now, why are we talking about Tiananmen Square? Because of Blade Angel Alysa Liu. So Alysa Liu's dad, the reason why we started getting into this is because Alysa Liu's dad was a political refugee brought to the United States after protesting the communist government following the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. So this tells us a lot about Alysa Liu's dad. Liu, thank you. Liu, thank you. I appreciate that. I can't pronounce anything. Yeah, an American woman actually did get run over by a bulldozer in Israel. That's true. He told the Associated Press in March 2022 that he'd been contacted by the FBI in October 2021 and warned about the scheme just as his then 16-year-old daughter was preparing for the Winter Olympics in Beijing. Arthur said a man then called him in November 2021, months before the Olympics, claiming to be an official with the U.S. Olympics and Paralympic Committee and asked for his and his daughter's passport numbers. Arthur refused to provide them and said he would call his contact at Team USA the next day. Arthur said he did not remember being approached in person by Matthew Ziboris, who was arrested in March 2022 on charges that included conspiring to commit interstate harassment and criminal use of means of identification. But prosecutors allege that Ziboris was hired to perform surveillance on the family and posed as a member of an international sports committee to ask Arthur for a copy of his and Alyssa's passports by claiming it was a travel preparedness check related to COVID-19. The complaint said when Arthur refused, Ziboris threatened to delay or deny them in international travel. Alyssa visited the family's ancestral home for the first time while at this Olympics in Beijing, but she was given security assurances and escorted by at least 2 people at all times. But through the spying investigation, he learned that China was aware of an Instagram message about human rights violations against the ethnic minority Uyghurs that his daughter once posted. Alyssa got lip tricked. I get it, man. It was a really popular story. That story really took off. Andrew Kendrick Lamar. This is from the PSL's thing. We'll take a look at this as well. But Alyssa got by the Xinjiang story, the Adrian Zun story. We forgive her. She was young. She's young. Who hasn't? Who didn't? Many such cases, Alysa Liu. Blade Angel is allowed to get propagandized once in a while. She grew up in a politically difficult climate, I'm guessing, based on all of this. Here we go, the Uyghurs. During the games, Alyssa also told her father that she was approached by a stranger late one night at a cafeteria after the free skate event, and the man followed her and asked her to come to his apartment. I think that's just a creep. I think that's just, again, many such cases. Like, that happens to me a lot. So I don't know that that's necessarily spy related. I think that's more Welcome to Pedophile America related. Like, I think that was just like an average creep. But look at her, Blade Angel. So speaking before this year's Winter Olympics, Liu called the espionage scandal a little bit freaky and exciting. You know what I mean? It's so unbelievable. You know what I mean? Like, that's crazy. She told Fox News Digital back in October. Like, imagine finding out at such a young age. I mean, like, in a weird way, I was like, am I in some prank show? Like, is this world real? Like, I must be some movie character. But I mean, it was like, it made sense to me, from like everything my dad did back in his activist days. Oh, she doesn't know. She doesn't know. It's okay. Now she can reach another milestone in her impressive career. She can get over the line on Thursday night. The 20-year-old scored 76.59 points for an impeccable short program on Tuesday. Asked whether she could beat her competitor. She said, I don't think about things like that. Whether I beat them or not is not my goal. My goal is just to do my programs and share my story. I don't need to be over or under anyone to do that. Okay, so that's Blade Angel's update. So Blade Angel is unfortunately an imperialist propagandist with a National Endowment for Democracy probably backed father. But you know, sometimes we're allowed to enjoy things. Right? People come around. She's just a girl. She's just a girl. She's just a little baby. Right? She, you know, sometimes you don't know. Sometimes you don't know. We can fix her. She needs some educating. Speaking of just little girls with bad politics that we raise in our homes, Fork has not responded to the anarcho-capitalist, feudalist, fascist billionaire accusations. She has been in bed. I'll see about that later. Sometimes you raise a lovely child, and this is what happens. I mean, even her dad, you know? Some of your favorite artist propaganda, be it Soviet or Red. Exactly. My favorite genre of movie is a horrible action movie. My favorite movie is Face Off. And literally the plot of Face Off is that North Korea wants to blow up LA. No explanation why. We're just supposed to believe that. And the FBI is going to stop it. That is my favorite movie of all time. So, yeah, John Travolta, Nicolas Cage, switching places, very poorly pretending to be each other. Excellent, excellent film. Fork's re-education program, potty training. We have not had an accident in many days. So, it has been successful. Largely, I think. She has no longer been peeing in front of the cat's litter box. She appears to understand that is actually not a bathroom. That is just a thing the cat gets to do. So we're making progress. So, oh yeah, that's my favorite genre of movie. Like, Con Air is another one of my favorite movies. They throw a guy out of an airplane over Fresno. So a really exciting moment for Fresnans in Con Air. These are my favorite movies. Yeah, our chairman is getting potty trained, everybody. Yeah, Nicolas Cage playing John Travolta playing Nicolas Cage. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. First time chat. That dude too. Yes. So, you know, it happens. All right. So let's take a look, just to follow up on our very complicated Alysa Liu story going on. Let's look at what one of the Marxist-Leninist orgs, three national Marxist-Leninist orgs in the United States, PSL, had to say about it in June 2023 from their newspaper. And I just want you guys to know, the Trotskyists get the reputation for the newspapers, but FRSO and PSL both have online newspapers where they release political orientations about what's going on. They usually will have the same takes as each other. They're both Marxist-Leninist orgs. We got papers too, is all I'm saying. Okay, we Marxist-Leninists have papers. So, you know, you don't have to become a trot just for the newspapers. That's all. That's all. We have papers too, and they're good. And you can look at both of them, and they are good. All right? So I'm just saying. Okay. So, this June 4th, this is back in 2023, marks the 34th anniversary of what is known on the United States as the Tiananmen Massacre. The story we are typically told in the West is that young student activists had gathered in Tiananmen Square, uniting around the liberal demands of democracy and freedom, bravely defying the repressive Chinese government. After weeks of these ongoing protests, the Communist Party of China had enough and cracked down on the peaceful protesters. As the story goes, in the early mornings of June 4th, 1989, People's Liberation Army tanks rolled into the square. They were said to be indiscriminately shooting and mowing down innocent, unarmed protesters, killing thousands. Ooh, we got 5 out of 10 new subs. Feel free to subscribe now, everybody. I will say, not to be that person, not to make it a telethon, but the fact that Twitch is monetizable is how I'm able to do this, because I could not justify doing this if I weren't treating it like a side hustle. And also I ended up in credit card debt last year when the economy tanked and I spent my savings trying to save everybody I knew, and then I ran out of savings and then I had emergencies and had no savings left. So we're working on restabilizing. So thank you guys for subscribing. It really does mean a lot to me, and I appreciate it a lot. So Back to the content. To put it simply, this particular understanding of a massacre of pro-democracy protesters in Tiananmen Square on June 4th is a fabrication, the mythology of which has been exploited by the West for over 30 years as evidence of the ruthless authoritarian nature of the CPC to justify imperialist aggression against China. Now, I will say, I think a lot of people tend to think PSL is soft and forget it's a Marxist-Leninist org. This is the impression I get sometimes when I talk to Marxist-Leninists, and I'm like, I don't think they're soft, babes. Yay, Malish gifted subs. Yay, thank you, Malish. I appreciate it. Yay, thank you, thank you, thank you. So nice, thank you, thank you. And we do have a really good sub-gifting community here, so I appreciate it, you guys. I really like it. Thank you. Contrary to what the internet tells you, I'm not actually a millionaire, and this stuff is helpful for me in my life. PSL is not like a softy, lived out org. They are a hardcore Marxist-Leninist organization, and I think sometimes people don't understand that. So they do have the good takes. So they go on to say, even the story of the Tank Man, the most iconic image to come out of the event, and has become a metonym for the Tiananmen massacre itself, has been deliberately manipulated by the U.S. media machine in the service of its anti-China propaganda effort. For one, the photo was taken on the morning of June 5th, not June 4th, so the military tanks were actually leaving the square. And second, the man in the photo was not run over by the tanks as implied by the image. First time chat, Newton Manny, welcome. And second, the man in the photo was not run over by the tanks as implied by the image. The full video shows that after a few seconds of the standoff, the tank attempts several times to swerve around the man, but he manages to keep stepping in its way, blocking the path. Finally, the man climbs up on top of the tank, looks to speak to the driver for a few minutes before finally climbing off and eventually jumping in front of the tank's path again. The standoff continues for another few seconds before the man is finally pulled away by a group of civilians. The truth of the 1989 Tiananmen protesters is far more complex than the simple rendering of an authoritarian Chinese government cracking down on unprovoked pro-democracy protesters. It is a story of societal divisions unresolved from the Cultural Revolution, which bled into the reform and opening up policy implemented under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping, finally erupting into the 7-week-long occupation of Tiananmen Square. It is also a story of the internal and external contradictions the Communist Party of China found itself navigating as it embarked upon economic development. 1966 to 1976. The Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. To fully understand the Tiananmen protests, we need to lay out the economic conditions and emerging ideological undercurrents which laid the foundations for them. This is a Madeline-ass post. This is like, to understand, we need to go back 600 years. I love it. I appreciate it. In 1966, Mao, along with close allies in the leadership of the Communist Party like Qing Wang Hongwen and Zhang Chengqiao and Yao Wenyuan. I really need to practice China if I'm going there in August. I gotta start saving for that too. Known as the Gang of Four, launched what is known in China as the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. This triggered a decade-long struggle within the CPC between their faction, which sought to prevent China and the international communist movement from going down the path of what they saw as a Soviet revisionism that strayed from the revolutionary principles of Marxism, and who they called the capitalist roaders led by Deng Xiaoping. I need to. It's important to note here that both factions of the CPC feared counter-revolution and recognized the necessity of economic development in order to overcome the legacy of its century of domination by colonial powers. They just differed in their assessment on how to achieve it. So they were both communists who were like, revision is bad, but they had different plots for how to get there, okay? Mao favored the continuation of a fully planned economy. He feared a new local bourgeoisie would develop as a result of opening up China to the global capitalist economy, and that it would bring counter-revolution. Now, Mao was correct. A new bourgeoisie did develop as a result of opening China up to the global capitalist economy. However, it did not bring with it counter-revolution. And now China is in a place where they are able to start cutting that down, right? Past 5 years, they've lost a third of their billionaires, have lost billionaire status in China. They're starting to fix it all out. So Mao was correct, though, to have this fear. Deng, on the other hand, recognized these risks, but was willing to take the gamble. Deng ended up being correct. By granting access to its domestic market and cheap labor pool, China would in exchange receive access to Western technology, allowing it to develop the productive capacity of its economy. Deng saw no other option but to walk that tightrope to achieve modernization. Now, it's also worth noting here, China was correct to see what happened in Russia and be like, that's bad. We don't want that. And this is 1989. This is before the USSR was completely dismantled. 1991 is when that would happen. But they were correct to be like, this is scary, right? This is scary what's happening in the USSR. We don't want to lose our revolution. That was a correct fear to have. So nobody can say that they are wrong for that, right? They were responding to a very, very real fear. But I will say that part of the reason why people suspect the economy of the USSR did not keep up also has to do with the fact that they were losing access to technology in the 80s from the United States. So Deng was like seeing, okay, the USSR has been made vulnerable by their lack of access to rapidly developing technology, the tech sector that started to come out in the 80s. We don't want to make that mistake. And that was where Deng was coming from. If the USSR, part of them losing their grip on things and starting to fall apart, had to do, not fall apart again. They didn't collapse. They were intentionally dismantled. But part of them wanting to move away from communism and do more reformism and revisionism and move towards capitalism more, that was seen as a failure and something scary for China. Part of it, if they saw that, was them not maintaining access to Western technology and not able to compete with rapidly developing Western technology. And remember, the USSR had won the space race. They had put people in space. They had developed great technology. But the 80s, it wasn't their era, right? It happens. Sometimes you have some development somewhere else. This is what Deng was responding to when he was really like, we need access to this technology that has specifically been and is being developed in the West, or we will be left behind. So we need to start making trade deals so we don't get left in the dust too. Okay, bye, Car. Modless chat. Modless chat. Both mods are gone. So you guys can be as chaotic as you want now. Right? So, this is all what was going on here that they were talking about. You're free. Be chaotic. Mao saw the Cultural Revolution as a continuation of class struggle. The 10-year campaign not only targeted those seen as revisionists and counter-revolutionaries both inside and outside the party, but also attempted to bridge the divide between the rural and urban populations. The political tumultuousness and the social upheaval of the period is well known, but less acknowledged are its achievements, particularly in education reform and expansion of medical care into the rural sectors of society. No slurs. Slurs are lazy. Lazy trolling. Around the time 80% of the Chinese population lived in rural areas, most of them were illiterate. I know what you were talking about. The Cultural Revolution saw expansion of primary school education and development of railways and other infrastructure to these areas. During this period, college entrance exams were suspended, and instead high school graduates were sent to the countryside to do work and learn from local populations. Despite these achievements, the rural-urban class divide still remained, and these antagonisms would intensify in this lead up to and during the Tiananmen protests. So 1976 to 1978, we hit the death of Mao and the path to reform. After a decade, the Cultural Revolution ended with Mao's death in 1976. In December 1978, at the third plenary session of the 11th Central Committee, the CPC met and adopted the resolution on certain questions and the history of our party since the founding of the People's Republic of China, to reckon with and correct what they saw as the mistakes of the Cultural Revolution, and to officially set the party on the path to reform. Recognizing the Cultural Revolution as a severe setback, this revolution placed the responsibility for its excesses on Mao, but did not repudiate him. It argued Mao made grave mistakes during the later years of his life, but what he contributed to China and to the CPC far outweighed whatever missteps he took. And you can read this on their website. I've read it before. I think it is very well executed. So this is what the PSL has to say about Tiananmen. So I can give you guys a tiny URL for it. The PSL obviously being one of the three main Marxist-Leninist parties here in the USA that we have. And they have good, they and FRSO both have good online papers. And the other two are FRSO and CPUSA. And CPUSA for a while I would not have called explicitly Marxist-Leninist, but they have undergone changes recently, so now I am comfortable calling them an explicitly Marxist-Leninist org and recommending them to people. Yay. So that's good. And CPUSA is the oldest Marxist org we have here in the United States, so they've been through lots of iterations. With this resolution came a reevaluation of the priorities of the revolution. Whereas Mao had previously identified the class struggle, of which the Cultural Revolution was the culmination, as the principal contradiction, the CPC now contended that China had advanced past this stage, as the exploiters have been eliminated as classes. While elements of class struggle still remained, the principal contradiction was now of backward social productivity versus people's material needs. So this resolution concluded, CPUSA used to endorse Democrats, but now they don't. They had this whole internal thing, and they had this big vote to stop doing that anymore. And I think a lot of the fresh blood in the CPUSA was like, we want to be an explicitly Marxist-Leninist party. And in their recent elections, from what I've heard from CPUSA members, this was overwhelmingly taken on as the new doctrine, and they are now moving forward as an aggressively Marxist-Leninist party, which I think is a great development for them, and I'm very, very happy. So they don't do things like that anymore. So the resolution said, after socialist transformation was fundamentally completed, the principal contradiction of our country has had to resolve is that between the growing material and cultural needs of the people and the backwardsness of social production. It was imperative that the focus of the party and government work be shifted to socialist modernization, centering on economic construction, and that the people's material and cultural life be gradually improved by means of immense expansion of productive forces. And we can see this is like, I wish they could see the future and see what they did. They did that, right? They fucking did that. In the final analysis, the mistake we made in the past was that we failed to preserve in making the strategic shift. What is more, the preposterous view opposing the so-called theory of the unique importance of productive forces, a view diametrically opposed to historical materialism, was put forward during the Cultural Revolution. All our party work must be subordinated to and serve the central task, economic construction. All our party cadres, and in particular those in economic departments, must diligently study economic theory and economic practice, as well as science and technology. So again, this is in 1978, late 1970s. Thus, the CPC embarked on the road to combine its planned economy with a market-based one in order to, in Deng's words, liberate the productive forces and speed up economic growth so the people of China would one day achieve common prosperity. Somebody recently was like, is this like the USSR's new economic plan, new economic policy, NEP? And yes, I think that this can be, the parallel can be drawn that Deng's market liberalization reforms were similar to the NEP in the USSR. The RCA are Trotskyists, so no, I don't recommend Trotskyists. I recommend Marxist-Leninists. I also don't recommend the ACP. No. CPUSA, yeah. ACP, no. Trots love themselves enough for the rest. That is so true, Hummus Guzzler. They're fine. They don't need us. So 1980 to 1989, reforming and opening up era, and this is what's leading us to Tiananmen. Under Deng's leadership, the CPC officially launched its Reform and Opening Up program in 1980 to reboost an economy devastated by the Cultural Revolution and speed up modernization to build its productive forces. And I just want to say again, the way that China talks about Mao, I think is very productive from a Marxist standpoint. They do not throw Mao under the bus. They do not discredit Mao. They talk about Mao's many great accomplishments and contributions to the revolution. They say the Cultural Revolution was a misstep, but that it happens, right? We learn from that and we move forward. And I think that the discipline with which China has for maintaining reverence for Mao as a political leader while acknowledging that this one thing was not as productive or good for them, I think it is very, very, it's great to watch, and it's very inspiring for how we talk about socialism and communism. And I think they do a good job with that. This is basically what happens in 1980 and 1989. Under Deng's leadership, they launched this Reform and Opening Up program to reboost their economy. And during this period, China integrates itself into the world economy abroad while scaling back social welfare programs and implementing economic liberalization policies domestically. Now, as you can imagine, if you were a communist student and this is happening, you're like, fuck, this is going to get bad. I would probably be one of those students protesting in the square. I would be very, very skeptical of this. The reforms included domestic policies to boost economic productivity. The government's iron rice bowl safety net was gradually chipped away. Jobs were no longer guaranteed by the government. And the centrally planned economy was transformed into more of a market-oriented one while retaining some level of state control. I would be fucking petrified if this happened to my country while I was living in it. And I understand why the students were afraid. And it was a gamble, as Deng said, but it did pay off. They were correct. In the rural areas, communes were decollectivized, with the collective farming system converted into a household responsibility system, which allowed households to contract land, machinery, and other facilities from collective organizations. Literally like what's it called? Like a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's when you make things from your home. It's literally like a term for a type of economy that was like kind of feudal era. I'm lost. It's going to come back to me though. Cottage industry. Thank you, Buckfast Supernova and first time chat Diggy Dung. Cottage industry. Yes. So they did partially return to a cottage industry. Yes. The households can make independent operating decisions within the confines of their contract, which allowed farmers to financially benefit from their crops. Farmer incomes and agricultural prices were raised to encourage consumption in the rural areas and help further close the rural-urban income gap. And this is something Marx was always speculating about, how to close that urban-rural income gap. Crop yields increased significantly during this period, adding another major boon for farmers. Urban reforms included decentralizing state industrial management and reforming state-owned enterprises to grant them some level of business independence and autonomy, and the lifting of price controls on staple food and agricultural commodities. The opening up included the implementation of Deng's open door policy, which allowed for foreign business investment in the country in exchange for access to China's cheap labor pool and the promise of super profits. A degree of risk was always present in the pursuit of these economic policies. They opened up China to foreign investment and foreign technology transfer to allow it to overcome its poverty and underdevelopment, but as predicted, a capitalist class emerged. Along with that came a new bourgeois ideology, producing social forces hostile to socialism. This is totally true. Now a segment of society, particularly students and intellectuals, increasingly looked westward to the United States and its institutions as an aspirational political model. Liu Xiaobao, one of the most vocal activists during the Tiananmen protests, who later won the Nobel Peace Prize, relayed such pro-colonialist aspirations in a 1988 interview when he firmly stated, "To choose westernization is to choose to be human." In another 1988 statement, Liu similarly asserted it took Hong Kong 100 years to become what it is. Given the size of China, certainly it would need 300 years of colonization for it to become like what Hong Kong is today. I even doubt whether 300 years would be enough. So now they're calling for their land to be actively colonized by the West. Yeah. So this, again, when the students were like, something bad is happening in China, I would have probably been there with them. And like I said, it was a gamble. And this is why I say I was a bit of a mouse for a while, because I was like, fuck Deng's reforms. But now you look at what China is able to offer today, and this is where I'm like, oh shit, it turns out Deng was cooking. Deng knew more what he was doing than I did, and that is a big scary gamble that they made, but it did pay off. It did pay off. Of this political shift among China's intellectuals, Li Mingqi, a Chinese political economist who also participated in the Tiananmen protests as a student, wrote, "Among the intellectuals, there was a sharp turn to the right. Many regarded Mao Zedong himself as ignorant, backwards Chinese peasant who turned into a cruel, power-hungry despot who had been responsible for the killing of tens of millions. The politically active intellectuals no longer borrowed discourse from Marxism. Instead, Western classical liberalism and neoliberal economics, as represented by Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, University of Chicago, had become the new fashionable ideology, free market capitalism." And remember, this guy destroyed Chile. We know these economic policies do not work. This guy ruined Chile. For his part, Deng anticipated and warned of these kinds of bourgeois ideological undercurrents, which would later feature so prominently among the student protesters at the 1989 Tiananmen protests. In 1985, he stated matter-of-factly, "Since the downfall of the Gang of Four, an ideological trend has appeared that we call bourgeois liberalization. Its exponents worship the democracy and freedom of the Western capitalist countries and reject socialism. This cannot be allowed. China must modernize. It must absolutely not liberalize or take the capitalist road, as countries of the West have done." And this is really the crux of socialism with Chinese characteristics, right? And what they really developed. And it did work, and it was miraculous. Though Deng saw the necessity of employing the mechanisms of the marketplace to develop its productive economy for the time being, the goal of socialism remained. Deng argues that the development of production would in time lead to common prosperity for the people, and he was right. I mean, they lifted 800 million people out of poverty. So 1989, this leads us all to the Tiananmen Square protests. It was these legacies of the Cultural Revolution and the economic liberalization reforms which would provide the social basis for the Tiananmen protests. On April 15th, 1989, Hu Yaobang, former general secretary of the CPC and one of the more radical advocates of the free market program, suffered a heart attack and died suddenly. Hu was one of the leaders of the Boluan Fanzhang, translated to Eliminate Chaos and Return to Normality campaign, which reversed many policies of the Cultural Revolution. It was the Boluan Fanzhang policy which saw the reopening of universities closed during that 10-year period, as well as the reopening of college entrance exams, granting students a pathway to higher education again. He also exonerated a number of intellectuals persecuted during the Cultural Revolution. And again, the Cultural Revolution mostly targeted schools and academia. There were other areas, but the areas that were hit the hardest were intellectuals, education. For these reasons, Hu was a beloved figure among students and intellectuals. Over the next few days, university students mourned Hu's death and held rallies in his honor, marching to Tiananmen Square to place flowers for him at the Monument to the People's Heroes. So in that text we were reading earlier, when they were talking about the monument, this is what they were talking about. These rallies then evolved into protests for further economic and political reform, turning into an occupation of the square, which lasted 7 weeks until June 4th and what we now know as the Tiananmen protests. The demands in the beginning of the protests were mostly relating to the lifting of price controls, inflation, and labor market competition. They were mad about these things, right? They were mad about the liberalization stuff. The lifting of price controls led to price hikes on staple foods and commodities for those in urban areas. This was a boon to rural businesses and farmers, but in cities, this intensified an existing inflation and cost of living crisis. Urban workers' wages were not keeping pace with this inflation, which had reached a staggering 18% by 1989. It was for these reasons that a significant number of workers eventually joined the students in the protests at Tiananmen. Oh, gifting! Yay! Thank you for gifting us a subscription. Thank you, everybody. Yay! Malrish, would it be fair to say that Deng's reforms also caused anti-communist efforts to stumble? They thought they were winning all of a sudden instead of continuing to castigate China. It caused liberals to start embracing China. I would say politically in the United States, yes. So my podcast co-host David often says that Henry Kissinger was a bit of a Dengist. Which is glib, right, and funny, but it kind of is true. Kissinger saw in Deng's policies an opportunity for the West. Kissinger, I don't think, had a very developed understanding of communism or socialism. I don't think he understood that these market liberalization forms could fit into a Marxist understanding of the transition eras necessary to get you to socialism or communism. So I think Deng just saw an economic opportunity. And I think that made the West, the United States, start to embrace China because we could use them for cheap labor. We could come to rely on them economically. And I don't think we saw it coming that they would commit to socialism. I think we saw this as the beginning of them just becoming capitalist. And that ultimately protected China and insulated them in a lot of ways from political violence from the United States, which allowed them, ironically, to develop into this path to actually do more socialism in the future. This is kind of what I think. Very, very interesting, right? So demands also revolved around ending corruption within the CPC. I'll do a little bit more. I only have a few more minutes. I know I'm running late today, but I think we're almost there. Demands also started revolving around ending corruption within the CPC as some members of the party used their political leverage to become the earliest capitalists and enrich themselves. The student protesters especially resented those in the party who, with the right connections, were able to attain a few higher level jobs that existed. Oh, Fork's mad. Hold on, David might be here. Just a sec. Sorry, one sec. David and I are recording a podcast on my lunch break today, so Fork's losing it because he's here. Okay, well, we'll wrap this up really fast. Sorry. So the student protesters especially resented those in the party who were able to basically get rich off of these new economic opportunities. And the 1980s saw an expansion of higher education. Most jobs at the time were still low-end and in manufacturing, which didn't appeal to university students. But sharp class divisions were evident amongst those in the square, and tensions existed between student and worker protesters. Though they were eager to grow their numbers and enlist support, the student protesters shunned and looked down upon the urban workers, and the two segments were often segregated at Tiananmen. Student leaders insisted that the workers stay off the main part of the square in order to keep the democracy movement, in their eyes, pure. The student leaders of the protests were not shy in voicing their contempt for the workers. In an interview for the New York Times, Wang Dan, a 20-year-old history student at Beijing University who was one of the most prominent student leaders in the square, stated bluntly that the movement was not yet ready for worker participation. According to him, democracy must first be absorbed by students and intellectuals before they can be spread to others. This is the kind of stuff that Mao was like, what the fuck? Li Mingqi similarly wrote of these elitist attitudes felt among students in later reflections of the protests. As the student demonstrations grew, workers in Beijing began to pour onto the streets in support of the students, who were, of course, delighted. However, being an economics student, I could not help experiencing a deep sense of irony. On the one hand, these workers were the people that were considered passive, obedient, ignorant, lazy, and stupid, yet now they were coming out to support us. On the other hand, just weeks before, we were enthusiastically advocating reform programs that would shut down all state factories and leave the workers unemployed. I asked myself, did these workers really know who they are supporting? Indeed, the demands put forth by the protesters overall were often diverse, and at times at odds with one another. Workers were critical of Deng's economic liberalization policies as they bore the brunt of their negative impacts. Inspired by the emerging capitalist class in China, students demanded an acceleration of the reforms, yet were also protesting the consequences these reforms brought: corruption, inflation, and skyrocketing cost of living. There were vague demands of democracy adopted by students and intellectuals that reflected the nascent bourgeois liberalization political orientation Deng had previously warned of. They were confused, right? This was a confusing moment politically. And while worker participation was certainly not insignificant, it did not really determine the political character of the revolution. It was student protesters with pro-Western orientation, signs written in English, and cries for bourgeois democracy that received international media attention and the most resources. So this was a conflicting movement of different people, right? And they refused to cede or even share leadership with the urban workers. So remember, when I talked about, there were two different factions of students. There were the students in the square who were fighting against the market liberalization reforms. And then there were people operating outside of the square who were backed by the West, who were backed by CIA funding and newspapers and typewriters and fax machines, who were backed by National Endowment for Democracy funding. They were writing signs in English, and they were like, we want democracy, we want USA, we want capitalism, basically. So these were competing factions. What we think Blade Angel's dad actually did, I think he's got Ned written all over him, right? He's got to be, this is pure speculation, the guy's got to be CIA. He had to be an operative, he had to be an agent. I think he was an asset. I'm almost done, I swear. I have to be done hardline by 10 minutes time, and there's a lot still to go through, so we'll skim. And then, here we talk about the media amplification that happened for this specific class of pro-Western protesters, right? So reporters from the NBC, BBC, ABC, and Voice of America, which is USAGM, that's our state-controlled media, had a consistent presence throughout the protests, covered them extensively. The US-funded propaganda arm, Voice of America in particular, had an especially heavy presence in Tiananmen, with one correspondent recalling VOA was extremely popular in the square, with students holding up radios so the crowds could hear our Mandarin language newscasts. Others transcribed our stories and posted them in electrical poles around the city. Again, that's US government propaganda. That's what Voice of America is. That is US government propaganda. As time passed, the actions along with the demands began to escalate as student leaders became more and more hardlined and radicalized. In mid-May, the student leaders organized mass hunger strikes to coincide with the visit of Gorbachev, then leader of the Soviet Union. The hunger strikes prevented the Chinese government from welcoming Gorbachev in Tiananmen Square. The protests paralyzed the city, and we just see ideological conflicts occurring. Finally, Premier Li Peng declared martial law, and many protesters defied it and chose to remain in the square. The students built and erected a 30-foot Goddess of Democracy statue bearing a striking resemblance to the Statue of Liberty. There was undoubtedly CIA involvement in the protests. The full extent remains unclear to this day. According to a Vancouver Sun article from September 17, 1992, the CIA had sources among protesters and within Chinese intelligence services and was assisting students in organizing the anti-government movement by providing support in the form of typewriters and other equipment. Chinese officials at the time also accused U.S. diplomats and CIA agents of collecting intelligence aggressively during the protests. Given what we do know about CIA involvement in other socialist countries during the Cold War, we can safely assume there was some level of U.S. intelligence at least attempting to steer the direction of the student demonstrations. Soon, what were demands to control inflation, which was the negative effects of Deng's liberalization policies, turned into calls to overthrow the Communist Party completely, with some leaders even going so far as to call for bloodshed. And then we have the quote that we saw here from Chai Ling, who was like, we want them to be killed. We want the protesters to be killed by the Chinese government so that we can move to capitalism instead. I don't know if we'll be able to see David. We'll see. It's worth noting that by the time of this interview, Chai had already secured a visa to the United States as part of CIA's Operation Yellowbird mission, which secretly smuggled hundreds of student dissidents out of China. So we're speculating that Alysa Liu's dad was part of this, because it said that he had to come to the United States following the Tiananmen Square protests. So this is the operation. We're speculating wildly. Perhaps irresponsibly, that he was a part of. That would be my guess, though. Yellowbird, yeah, we're real racist here. Did you? Well, they're Asian, so they're yellow. And we're flying them out like a bird. Call it Operation Yellowbird. Yeah, we're real weird fucks over here in the United States. Yeah, it's real fucked. So this would be my guess, that this is what he was a part of, and it's why we've gone down this long, long journey. Clip it. She would not even be around for the bloodshed she was calling for. After their arrival in the United States, student leaders like Chai would then be thrust into the media spotlight, meeting with politicians and used as propaganda tools to cement the mythology around the so-called June 4th massacre. So the myth versus the reality. The story goes that the CPC orders the People's Liberation Army to clear Tiananmen, and tanks roll into the square. They just start killing people indiscriminately. The massacre narrative is sensational. Supposed eyewitness accounts tell tales of student protesters linking arms, only to be run over repeatedly by military vehicles, remains of protesters incinerated, then washed down drains, students begging for their lives, only to be bayoneted by soldiers. Western reports said up to 10,000 people were killed. But this didn't happen. There was no such massacre in Tiananmen Square. By the time that time, most of the protesters had left the square, and the ones who remained left peacefully after negotiating with the army. A leaked diplomatic U.S. cable sent around the time confirms no bloodshed occurred in the square. The student protesters were able to enter and leave the square several times and were not harassed by troops. Remaining with students by the Monument to the People's Heroes until the final withdrawal, the diplomat said there were no mass shootings of students in the square or at the monument. Other eyewitness reports from the ground journalists corroborate this. CBS News correspondent Richard Roth, we talked about him. Washington Post, we talked about that. Nicholas Kristof for the New York Times, we talked about that. So this is all the stuff I showed you earlier, right? While these journalists refute the narrative of Tiananmen massacre, most of them do acknowledge that street fighting had occurred the night of June 3rd in other parts of Beijing, albeit under different circumstances. And this is consistent with Chinese government accounts of the events. On June 2nd, the CPC decided to clear Tiananmen Square. On the night of June 3rd, PLA tanks pushed into Beijing with clashes occurring around the neighborhoods of Muxidi, Gongzhufen, and along Chenggang Avenue. These clashes occurred outside of Tiananmen, so while there were some students involved, they were relatively few in number. Armed with Molotov cocktails, workers and civilians stopped and attacked trucks of soldiers, seizing weapons to use against the soldiers. Tanks were set ablaze by rioters, with soldiers still inside. Some soldiers were even lynched. A Wall Street Journal article from June 5th recounts, as columns of tanks and tens of thousands of soldiers approached Tiananmen, many troops were set on by angry mobs who screamed fascists. Dozens of soldiers were pulled from trucks, severely beaten, and left for dead. Again, this is what no theory does to a motherfucker, right? This is what no theory does to a motherfucker. Why are you calling the communists fascists? What's happening here? They got real America pilled. This screams CIA, national democracy all over the place, right? At an intersection west of the square, the body of a young soldier who had been beaten to death was stripped naked and hung from the side of a bus. Another soldier's corpse was strung up at an intersection east of the square. Journalist David Eichmann recalls in some places soldiers were stripped almost naked, chased or struck by angry citizens. Other injured troops had difficulty getting to hospitals as mobs deflated or slashed the tires of military ambulances. According to official government figures, the number of people killed in these clashes totaled 241, which includes PLA soldiers, which other people said it was roughly half of. So, this is kind of it, and this is what the real story was. And you can read the PSL's kind of summary, right? For Western imperialists, Deng's reforms were not enough. They wanted unfettered access to China's markets and resources so that this country could become a neo-colony of the United States. And this is really what they were fighting for, to try to co-opt the movement of Tiananmen. An overthrow of the CPC would have been a kind of shock therapy in capitalist reforms that would have been akin to what ended up happening to the USSR later. And we saw what happened to the USSR when they did this, is that it killed many, many people and was very, very destructive. So that is why we talk about Tiananmen Square. That is why this story about Alysa Liu, champion figure skater's dad, coming to the United States, running away to the United States after the Tiananmen protest because of his involvement, her calling him an activist at the time in favor of the United States government. That's why this is all very relevant and interesting and important to talk about and discuss, right? This is the context for that story. And I think that's just really fascinating. And I know it's not really current events, we got too into history, but it is related to current events a little bit. So with that in mind, I think maybe we end today's stream with some lovely photos of our Blade Angel, who is following in her father's footsteps, repeating anti-Communist Party propaganda, unfortunately, about Xinjiang. But, nobody's perfect. And I think maybe we can fix her. Chat, what do you think? Do you think we can fix her? I think we can fix her. Look at her. We can fix her. I think we can fix her. Look how cute she is. She doesn't know better. She little. She just know ice skate. She just know ice skate. And yes, the CIA notoriously dumps people in Fresno, if you're not familiar with that. They dumped the Hmong population from Laos that we tricked into fighting on behalf of the United States against the Vietnamese communists there. The CIA dumps people in Fresno. And if you grew up in Fresno, you know that. My friend's mom was dumped there. Her dad had been high up in the U.S.-backed dictatorship in Nicaragua. And when they were overthrown by the people, her whole family was dumped in Fresno as well. So the CIA does dump people in Fresno. So the fact that he has a connection to my lovely hometown of Fresno, her dad, that makes sense. That is where we dump our CIA corroborators in other countries. So that is the source of my speculation. It is speculation, take it with a grain of salt, but the evidence is there to support the theory, right? Yeah. Okay, so that's it for our stream today. Who should we raid with our final few moments? How do you get a medal from places? Fresno's fucking cool as fuck. All of Fresno's full of me. I'm nothing special. I'm just the Fresno you met. So I highly recommend taking a lovely trip to Fresno. Okay, who do you guys want to raid before we go? Thanks all for being here. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. Imagine selling out your country being dumped in Fresno. Hey, you watch your mouth. The privilege of being dumped in Fresno. Let's keep doing Leaping Larry. Let's keep doing Leaping Larry because he's back, obviously, after having been banned for a while. And it's good to get people there. So I'm going to do that. Oh, Central Committee. Oh, we can do Central Committee. We can alternate back and forth between Central Committee and Leaping Larry. What do you guys think? Any votes? Any votes? Who has only 31 views? Larry? Larry. Let's do Larry. I think Larry does good work. Good work on North Korea there. All right. We're going. Okay. Bye, everybody.